In Sweden, it doesn't happen that often because they intentionally make sure both parties are genuinely happy about the deal. And if you're not, they don't want to do it because they don't want it to fall apart down the road and turn into a lawsuit. So they'll sincerely say, "Are you sure you're happy about this deal? Like, I want to make sure are you genuinely? Let's sit on it, think about it, and if you're still excited about doing it tomorrow, let's do it. If you're not excited about it, let's not do it because I don't want, you know, we need both of us to feel like it's a win-win." And so they're really good at sincerely seeking out the win-win scenarios, and I love them for that. Yeah.
So, Tyler, would you classify it as having a lot of honor and then being motivated by or fearful of shame?
Yes, they are very. They're, oh my God, are they afraid of being? Was more than this. Inside of the ecosystem, everyone knows everybody, and so it's not special for me to say I know everybody. Everybody knows everybody in our little ecosystem, and if you have to be initiated and brought into the ecosystem, and somebody has to vouch for you and say, okay, everybody, I want to bring this person into the party, because once they're in the party, you don't need to deal with lawyers. You can handshake with everybody. You can call up, anybody in the ecosystem and be like, let's have coffee and make a deal. And then it goes incredibly fast and incredibly fluid and strong. So they're obviously very careful about who they let into the party, and they are. And many people, you feel it when you come in, and nobody's inviting you to nothing, and you're not allowed to be part of the group. And you have to earn your way in, because once you're in, you don't want to fuck it up. If you fuck over somebody in the entire ecosystem, you're out of the group forever. No one will ever invite you to anything ever.
Blackballing.
You are completely out of society, period. And it happens. It happens from time to time. Like once a year, somebody will get outed. You're done. No one will ever talk to you again. You are a social leper, as if you have, smallpox, and no one will ever engage with you. They literally won't respond. I've seen how it happens when it happens to people, where they won't respond to your emails. They'll just pretend like you don't exist. Yeah.
Can I add on to that, just from a little bit of experience?
Yeah.
My experience around the Swedish ecosystem has been exactly the same, and it's very true, because I have a lot of trouble negotiating with Swedish businessmen, and the reason behind that is because I come from a region which is very cutthroat on negotiations, where everyone is going in for a kill, trying to get at each other's necks.
Yeah.
And it's not the quick process, it's the fight process, it's war, it's all out cutthroat business war at each other. And to date, the one ecosystem which to me makes absolute no sense, and I have trouble breaking through in, is the Swedish ecosystem. Even on some of the most recent calls that I've had with some business leaders there, it's just so difficult to read, where I just can't entertain a negotiation in the ecosystem, because it's just not the right play for me.
Yes.
I'll stop there.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah, for us,
Yeah.
I was going to add, it's interesting. I'm coming up to 10 years, having left the Valley and moved to Africa and doing essentially trying to invest in startups and grow ecosystems here. And it's interesting to see how I have changed as a business person in that time, because I remember in Silicon Valley, it was just, and this is, it speaks to the point of Sweden, is like the trust factor is very high when you talk to anyone, right? You can meet them in the coffee shop, you can meet them in the club, you can meet them at, it's just really high trust factor. You can hire people. I've seen someone get hired in the Starbucks line once for an engineering job, and I think it was in Palo Alto. Africa, the trust is almost flipped. Everyone's very aggressive, and because they think they're going to get screwed over, right? And I have been screwed over in the early days, being naive and being like, I'm just a Silicon Valley trained VC entrepreneur. But now I am much more aggressive, and it's really strange when I go back and people are like, wow, you've changed how you negotiate. You're much more aggressive. But unfortunately, I think the aggressive aspect doesn't help with nurturing collaboration and startup growth. Because, by very nature, you need to do this, and particularly in the IT space. And whilst in Africa, it's, to get ahead, you're often screwing someone over. I mean, I once mentored an entrepreneur in an accelerator I started in Kenya, where they literally asked a mentor came in about how they managed to get a government contract and who did they bribe to get it, and he attributed all their success to that, being able to get to the top, right? And I'm like, shit, am I even providing the right mentors to mentor these young Kenyans? Because the way these people got to the top for their company may not be the way that the startup they're trying to build in the fintech space is going to work, right? We need to collaborate with Visa and Google and etc. and Facebook, etc. It's a different game altogether. So I just wanted to kind of put that in.
Tyler, you want to invite Sarah and Daniel
Sure.
join the conversation
Okay.
since you're there?
Oh yeah, Sarah's a friend from Stockholm. Yeah. And Daniel's actually from Norway. Nicholas is from Sweden, and Ranjit is from Sweden.
And where's Johan?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna add into Mbwana's what he said. It really, really is very difficult. I came in, I came back 6 years ago, and I was like, oh, let's collaborate, do this and that. And I got screwed like 2 times. And in fact, somebody from way high up, and they said, we'd love to fund this, let's do that and this. And they sent me to, the investment manager. And he came flat out and he said, okay, if you give me 30% of your company, that we can get you through access to the financing, to the grant financing. So it's really, really difficult, actually. Even today, I find it very difficult to work and collaborate because it's just the trust issue is not there. So yeah, I don't know how I can break it. So Mbwana, if you found a way to fix this, please let me know. So
Ranjit has a really good point to raise that he just DM'd me about, and then welcome Sarah. I'd love to hear your thoughts next, but share your point about the 6 months, Ranjit.
That is also one of the most important things, that if you're working in any company, you get 6 months to try out your startup. No questions asked. You just need to tell your boss that I'm going to try my startup. You just need to inform the company, like I think 1 or 1.5 months notice period, and then you just go and try your startup. If it works, it's good. If it doesn't work, you are welcome to the company back. Then you come back with a lot of experience. And I personally did it when I worked at Scania. I gone out 6 months, tried out, and then I came back. And after 2 months, I resigned from Scania and gone ahead with my startup. So that is one of the very, very welcoming things.
Yeah.
Second,
that's amazing.
If you worked on a startup, you get a much higher priority for your next job. If the startup didn't work, or you want to come back to the corporate job, you get much higher priority. And I had experienced it. The current job which I'm working now, I got my offer letter in 36 hours. That is unheard of in Sweden. Usually the period is 3 months to 4 months. I got my offer letter after my first interview in 36 hours. So that is something which is great about trying startups. There's
one other super important reason I want to share, if I can, Sarah, before I hand the floor to you. And this is a huge one, and nobody's been bringing this up in these interviews. That Reuters is just the most recent one to do this, and they do bring up the stats I mentioned that that we're unique to. It says Stockholm is second only to Silicon Valley in terms of unicorns, startups valued at over 1 billion per capita. And it has the third highest startup rate in the world, behind Turkey and Spain, with 20 startups per 1,000 employees, and the highest 3-year survival rate for startups anywhere in the world. So we have of 74%, and then we have the highest number of engineers, people working in tech, of any city in the world, actually. So the point I want to bring up, though, is that this is truly unique. The reasons this is really bizarre. Spotify happened in Stockholm. By the way, so did Beats, their competitor. The Beats Music originated in Stockholm. By the way, so did Tidal. All these music companies started in Stockholm. Why is that? That seems really strange. I'm from LA. I had a record deal. I'm a geek. A lot of my friends were trying to build those same systems in LA and could not. Why is that? This is really interesting. And this hands it over to Sarah, because Sarah is an OG music industry veteran, and a geek. So this is right up her wheelhouse. But essentially, can we credit Per Sundin with this, Sarah, specifically? He and a couple other folks at Universal in Sweden looked at Spotify, not as a existential threat or competitor, but as an opportunity, as a partner, because they knew this is inevitable. This is where the fans are going to go. This is where the kids are going. So we should work together. And okay, I will give you a license to the Universal Catalog to put in Spotify. They couldn't do that in America. All the American Spotify competitors at that time go to the labels, and the labels said, hell no, we're not going to give you our catalog to put inside of your app. You're a competitor. You're good. So in this, and then Spotify did get all the catalogs of the music companies. People loved it. It exploded in Sweden. Again, the customer base, the users are 1 year or 2 years ahead, as the article points out, because they have much faster streaming. They're on 4G when everyone else in America was still on 3G, and it was great. It's obvious. It's the right solution. Everyone knows, the whole planet knows that now. But it took convincing of the American labels. They had to actually show them the data that showed, look, once you do this system, you win as a label, because people are engaging with music more, and it's a good scenario even for you. But they really had to be strongly convinced by the actual data, which could only happen in Sweden because the Swedish labels didn't perceive it as a threat. And that is key to the Swedish mentality, this is super fundamental to Swedishness, which is things that seem like a potential threat to an American, because anything seems like a threat to an American. They don't. They think, how can we partner? How can we merge? How can we work together? That's just their way. And I'll give you an example. And by the way, that's why the fintechs are also coming out of Sweden, as I just read, because the banks are doing the same thing with the Swedish startups, where the American banks are doing the same thing the American record labels did, which is, no, you're a fintech startup, you're the enemy. They don't do that in Sweden. They don't perceive you as the enemy necessarily. They're going to sit down and conversate with you and authentically try and find a win-win. And if there is one, they'll do it. And they feel like it goes back to their roots of not having engaged in war for hundreds of years. They're just not interested in fighting. They're interested in collaborating and finding win-win collaborations. So much so that when I arrived, other tech events met with me and said, oh, we're going to partner, we're going to merge and do our tech events together. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? That's not how Americans work. We don't do that. Everyone else, I'm not going to be your enemy. I'm not going to try and kill you, but I'm going to build this thing, in the way that any American would. And then I now realize, their perspective years later. It took time for me to understand the perspective that they came at it with, which is, oh, if you're in the same business, this is why there's really not a lot of competition of any kind in Sweden. Everyone figures out what, if two people are working on the same thing, they merge and they do it together, and then they control that aspect, and there's a bunch of little micro monopolies where there's one company that kind of is the power player in robotic arms, and another company is the power player in 5G, and another that's just how it works. So Sarah, maybe you could add in a thought.
Well, thanks, Tyler, and morning, everybody, at least if you're in Europe. I have been sitting here nodding and agreeing with everything you're saying since the start of this conversation about Stockholm. I myself moved back to Stockholm for the same reasons, especially around 2013-14 when the startup ecosystem exploded, very much with you, Tyler, here. And I want to credit you with a lot of bringing everything together, and with your coming in with the Silicon Valley American perspective, kicking everyone going, because yes, it's fantastic the way people collaborate, and every single thing you are saying, I find it unique to Sweden. It is truly one of the reasons I myself moved back after a whole career outside of Sweden. And mentioning when you got to the Spotify part, as you and some of you know, I was at EMI in Virgin, working internationally out of London, in Asia, Middle East, also in LA, of course, and what to me was the music hubs, London and LA growing up. And then all these Swedes started popping up everywhere from the tech world, and creating, just as you say, what became Spotify, what became Tidal, what became Beats. And before that, SoundCloud, and all
Oh, I
this
forgot
tech
Alex and Eric
buzz.
from SoundCloud. You're right. They're from Stockholm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with myself, there was a startup that they approached me, several people from the industry, Ludwig Werner, and from the traditional music industry who, like me, were geeks, because a lot of us, even if our generation grew up with all these, I actually went to school with people who were building the internet and a lot of the technology needed, and that's probably why we are so far ahead. And going back to Ericsson, etc., we all know that here. But also when Spotify turned up, and I was like, wow, what's happening in Sweden? Here's another thing out of Stockholm completely. The rest was sort of collaborating with LA and LA in particular, but of course also Silicon Valley. But then seeing it from a music industry perspective, from the more traditional side at that point, I was like, what's with everyone in my own company? Why are they seeing this as something bad and the enemy? This could be the new music company. And then I even had my own colleagues and bosses who were saying, well, you and your Swedish friends again, you just want us to look at all these companies. I said, I don't even know these people. I've worked for EMI for over 10 years, and I've been in the industry for 20 outside of Sweden. It's just, I want to know what's happening there. And I started to contact them. And exactly as you say, Tyler, when I thought, okay, I can speak to the label nationally, or then for Scandinavia, the people who are working there, the ones who didn't stop me from opening web pages and starting to use social media, which came a bit later, and who get this. And I really believe that that is exactly as you say, Tyler, that so much that the bosses of the labels in Scandinavia got this. And also exactly as you're saying about the startup world and tech companies, they of course collaborated and talked to each other, and don't sit there, oh, I'm Sony, I'm Warner, I'm EMI, I'm Virgin. And at the time there were still 5, Universal, of course. And I was amazed at how quickly things started to happen from then. I still, of course, coming from creating an ecosystem and community within the ecosystem, very much within what you have built and doing, Tyler, which is amazing for the whole Nordics, I would say,
Oh,
and
thanks.
globally.
I'll
I
just
mean, it
explain.
really is.
Yeah, Karan.
Tyler, can I,
Yeah.
yeah, quickly want to
Yes,
ask this, like,
of course.
this particular question. Sorry for being absent for like almost a week from the room. I've
No
been
worries.
traveling here and there. So, yeah, now in Islamabad. So, specifically to this particular thing, we've been trying to actually replicate the Silicon Valley for ages. I mean, so many ecosystems have actually tried that. We haven't been even able to actually replicate the Silicon Valley, even within the US, and other countries have actually tried to,
Yeah.
take some bits and pieces of the Silicon Valley and try to replicate that in other
Yeah.
parts of the world. Now, this thing is amazing that what happened in the Nordic. Now, looking from the perspective, now, if you look at the demographics, now you have one country which is like totally free market and the free flowing money and all that in case of the Silicon Valley. And here, close to a socialist country, basically, where the taxes are like, up to close to like 40-45%, depending on whatever the
And
actual
more.
scale is, and more. So, how could it, could flourish this much that
Hmm.
we were able to actually produce that many, unicorns. Now, to look at on the fundamental level, that what actually driven that without bringing in some of the elements from the Silicon Valley and then try to actually replicate it here,
Hmm.
it was very unique in nature. So what are those 3-4 things in your opinion? And you and Sarah has been,
May-
can actually
Yeah.
shed some light on it. So yeah.
Maybe I can shed
Can
some
I?
on
Oh,
it
I was. Oh,
because
sorry. I was just quickly. I'll just chime in. Sorry, Peter. I just wanted to quickly say there that it's exactly when it comes to, instead of replicating ecosystems and others, the mindset of the Nordics and Stockholm was, oh, let's collaborate. So even there, it's like, let's collaborate with Silicon Valley, right, Tyler?
True. Oh,
And
there was a desperate desire to try and collaborate with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley's like, who are you? Why are you
yeah.
trying to collaborate with us? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Peter.
What's wrong with you? You're
Yeah.
supposed to compete. And
Yeah.
this about merging companies. I'll just end by before you, I'll sorry I interrupted you, Peter, but just and my own passion for this with when it comes to music tech, where it's just sizzling. It's you're just going to see an explosion coming, and it's so exciting to be here in the midst of this and to be part of accelerating this by bringing people together, because the intersection of music and tech are still very far away from each other. And finally, of course, aside from the labels and people understanding tech and being so forward thinking, in that if we see, to me, of course, and I think to most of us here, the music tech explosion, the new music tech wonder of Sweden and the Nordics, but it's mainly Sweden, started with Spotify, really, when it comes to unicorn thinking.
Yeah.
And of course, that we are huge in music. The music industry, be it traditional still, out of Sweden, Sweden alone is second to, it's all tech areas put together. The music
Yeah.
industry is still bigger in actual revenue, which is crazy. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, we gotta move along. But Peter, what you want to make a point?
Yeah, because I was actually there and I know why the computers to everyone eventually ended up happening, because I actually took a company public, internet company, in 1996, which was early by any measure in any country, even the US. So we started to show how database driven websites could be built and build a business around that in 95, 96, about as early as Jeff Bezos did at Amazon. And we did it from a town in southern Sweden called Vetlanda with 16,000 people. And you can expect what the reaction was from Stockholm when people, when they barely believed that the internet was anything, and someone is doing something that is at the cutting edge from middle of nowhere in Småland in southern Sweden. And I wasn't alone, because there was a thing called Bredbandsbolaget, the broadband company
Agency.
at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And so we were a couple of people that were laying out the blueprint, and we were talking to the banks about how to create payments on the internet and connect that. And I was involved in that. And we were also talking about mobile payments. And I was involved in that in the second half of the 90s. So that was what forced things, that because the minister in Sweden that was responsible called it, she called it the fad that about computers. So they were brought kicking and screaming. And what in January, February 98, basically my story was that it was a brutal roller coaster. And eventually I was outmaneuvered out of the company, and it was very educational, and I learned a lot from it. It was brutal at the time and so forth. The but what the thing is that forced the computer business in Sweden to change completely, to go to online commerce so much earlier. And I could tell you a lot of stories of what the reception was uh, among the people that saw it. There were people talking to me, and all the big computer companies told us, let's talk about how we can cooperate. Officially, we will support the traditional channels, but let's talk about how we can cooperate. There was what happened, but the blueprint for how things were done and that it could be done. We showed proof of concept, and not only proof of concept, but that it was real, and it was scaring the living daylight out of the people that wouldn't jump onto it. So it opened up the possibilities, and the things that drove a lot of things. Of course, like you said, computers were fairly common in Sweden, and the education was better and more familiar than elsewhere. It was also Ericsson was there. That's also was so. The idea about tech and so forth was there, but the very fact that I was involved in showing it, and a couple of other people were driving it, that it went from being seen as a fad, and it kept being seen as a fad much longer in the rest of the world. But in Sweden, by the late 90s, it was taken as, this is for real. we better take it serious.
Okay.
And that, so anyway, that is there's more to be said, but
Yeah. So
that
I
was
love
what
it.
was before that happened.
Gotcha.
What you said there. So, and what you have done later on, it's like amazing and all of that. So
Well, I
anyway, thank
wanted to, I actually wanted to push back against that because I'm actually very, um, I want to state the record, and that's why I'm glad Annika jumped on stage, because I feel like Sarah and yourself, I get way too much credit for helping with the Stockholm ecosystem, honestly, because all of the ingredients were already there. I honestly didn't. The only ingredient I brought was some of that, Silicon Valley American, ness that inspired.
Swag,
Yeah, a little
swag,
bit of
swag.
that. But honestly, all of the ingredients were there, and the ingredients are fantastic pipeline of talent coming out of these fantastic schools like Stockholm School of Economics and KTH. Any city would be honored to have one of those schools, but to have, and then you have Consfuct and the art school, and Barry's the communication school, and when you combine all those together, you've got your CMO and your CTO and your CEO, your future CEOs and CTOs and CMOs. So the pipeline of talent was all there. The ethos was there, the work ethic is there, the honorability is there, the ingenuity is all there. Everything was there. And believe it or not, Annika, I've never told you this, but every time I imagine, you know, uh, my arrival in Sweden, I imagine our meeting where you interviewed me for your podcast at Miller Paviljongen, and which is one of,
Yeah,
and
that was fun.
I literally, that's where my brain goes. You know how sometimes your brain memory, you have this one little memory that you associate with a bigger time of a year. You know what I mean? And when I
Yeah,
when
yeah.
I imagine arriving in Stockholm, I always imagine us sitting on Miller Paviljongen, and you had already known of me from the This Week in Startups, and we had a funny interview, and I remember sitting there on one of those amazing summer days, and just thinking, holy shit, what is this place? This place is amazing. And Annika's obviously a geek, and she gets it. And you introduced me to people, and everyone I met, I was like, wow, these people are amazing, and this place is amazing, and I got to figure out a way to stay here. That's what I remember thinking, when we were chatting at Miller Pavilion. And so I have to thank you for that. And she was already engaged in the beginnings of the organic grassroots ecosystem that was, it was there. The people were there. It was just a matter of, it was like a marching band, and we just needed to start playing the same song together. Is really all it came down to. And it was like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember I had Brian Solis at one of my conferences at that time, and he said to me, "You don't really understand in the Nordics how grateful you should be for your very flat management style, uh,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the style of company." And I think that also has to do a lot with the
100%.
success within the startup business, because I can only compare it actually within different countries in the Nordics, where Sweden, even if you're like a successful entrepreneur, you engage in young startups, you engage in young founders. Very few people would ever turn down a request for a question session
Right.
or an introduction to a VC or somebody who can help them forward. So I think that sense, which also of course ties into this sort of honesty and yeah, we're a small country and on verge of freezing all the time. So winter is coming and you need to sort of band together. So and that actually also goes back to a sort of I would say actually to the Viking Age, because you have the same kind of honor code,
Yeah.
help each other, because otherwise you
And
die from the element,
yeah, and
basically.
you're not
And
allowed
and
you're not allowed to
and
think
just
you're
yeah,
better than other.
no,
Yeah, that's the point you
yeah,
bring.
and I was
Yeah.
also like to tie it into that before and just after the Second World War, we had a very strong engineering tradition with a lot of companies, Alfa Laval, Ericsson, Volvo, and so on, started. And then, of course, we had a bit of change in the government in the 60s and 70s, which sort of puts everything on hold. So I think now it's sort of a bounce back where we can we already have an export sensibility and an attitude. We can't stay on our home market, which is similar to Israel, for instance.
Yeah, very.
So when you have a large home market, you don't really need to go abroad for other opportunities, but we do. Otherwise, we won't sell anything. So thanks
Yeah.
for
And then
taking the time.
last, I want to give Eli the last word because we've now spent 50 minutes and we haven't even gone to the second headline of the day. But Eli, do you want to make a point?
Yeah, quick ecological point on your account of the ecology. You probably remember Argentine ants from your time in Southern California and how massively successful they are.
Mm-hmm.
It is because they only came to North America about 7 times from South America. And so they all smell the same to each other. So when one ant from one colony runs into an ant from the next colony, they don't fight. They don't bother fighting. So they wind up not spending their energy trying to kill each other,
Hmm.
and therefore are able to compete better with, all of the non-ants and become super colonies that are far more successful here than they are in, say, Argentina, where they spend all of their time fighting with each other and they never, get larger than a couple of feet to the territory of the next colony, and they get outcompeted by other species.
Such an interesting point. Okay, so now we got the top. That we had a really interesting beginning today, and I think it was Cheryl or somebody who shared a Reuters article.
Yes, because of you.
Because
You woke up already?
yeah.
Are
Anyway,
you awake now?
about Sweden being a strong tech hub, which it is, but so is, as you said, Tel Aviv, and rightly so. And anywho, there's the biggest news story at this very moment. A happy August 11th and a happy Wednesday to everybody. The big story at this very moment is a headline that says that the group behind Poly Network, a cross-chain protocol used for decentralized finance applications, says a hacker stole $611 million worth of, I guess, some kind of currency, some cryptocurrency. One researcher blames the attack on a crypto flaw. The cross-chain protocol Poly Network has been hacked for $611 million, the team behind the protocol says. And maybe a May, or is there another crypto geek
Hey there.
who might shed a little bit of insight from
Hey
the
there,
ecosystem?
Tyler.
Yeah.
I saw that yesterday at the end of the second part of the second show,
Yeah.
and it was the largest hack in history, from what I understand and what I did some research on. And now, actually, Poly Network has actually put out a letter that says that they do and are asking the community to come forward and actually return the monies, because it's thousands of people's money, and it's Ethereum. It was part of the Binance Smart Chain, so basically it's Ethereum and a couple of other cryptos. So that's valid. The one thing that they said is that this is not a joke anymore. These sort of situations are getting more serious because regulators are coming in, and they did allude to the fact that the heavy hand of the regulators in law will come down very, very heavy on whoever did it, and they're basically pleading to return the funds. Now, Tyler, this goes back to chainless and being able to see where the funds go, because it is transparent, so they know the wallet it went to.
Uh-huh.
And the fact that they know the wallet it went to, that gives them the opportunity to find it, and they're basically saying either you come forward or we go after you fully hard stop, because many people have this misinterpretation or misunderstanding that everything that's done on this crypto exchange is not traceable, and actually it's the opposite. It actually is. It's not that hard if you put two and two together and you know what you're looking for to find the owner of the wallet. The key is it may take them a little bit longer, which is why the Poly Network has put out this request to return the funds. You either return them without question and possibly receive a bounty, or you will have to deal with ramifications of regulators and SEC and all the fighting folks in there that would come after them hard stop. So at this point right now, it would be very interesting to watch. I think the next biggest thing that I found very interesting that was similar yesterday, which is Polynex. Circle Polynex, they're finding them like 10 million or something like that, or a large amount of money. And it's really fascinating because the person who used to own Polynex before it was sold to, by, I think the name's gentleman Annie June or something like that, before it was sold to someone else, Circle is backed by Goldman Sachs. So before Polynex was sold, it was owned through an intermediary by Goldman Sachs, and it was sold. And now that it was sold, the owner of the new owner of Polynex is actually now also complaining, saying, "Wait a second, when you owned it, nothing happened, but now all of a sudden I own it, and you're coming after me for a fine." So there's some grumblings in there as well. So I think we're getting a lot of roller coaster situations in the crypto space, specifically as well because DeFi just had its Ethereum hard fork. London hard fork, and it's basically in essence going to make Ethereum deflationary. So, I mean, as many people could argue, it's still making it deflationary. And it is where most of the DeFi projects and protocols are building on because it is the most secure blockchain for financial transactions and derivatives. So, there's two sides of the coin. And the side of the coin that I sit on is the developer side. You want a secure blockchain, you want something that's going to work secure because, yeah, centralization will happen on it, but it is the securest blockchain because, as you could see, Poly Network is going after them. But I probably say within maybe a week, let's see what happens. Let's see if that person comes forward
Okay.
because I have a feeling they will. That's just my thought.
Okay. So the next big headline is that this is from Reuters and others are reporting. It's kind of a big story. Facebook says it has removed a network of accounts from Russia linked to a UK marketing firm that pushed anti-vaccine content. And we talked about a anti-vaccine campaign on Facebook, and this was reported about a month ago. And this they were claiming to be a UK marketing firm, and they were contacting German and French and Belgian influencers, asking them to promote the narrative that Pfizer is, more deadly than other vaccines. And this caught the attention of one influencer who happens to have a background as a journalist, and they were like, this is really bizarre behavior to ask influencers to do something like this. Who's this quote unquote marketing agency that's claiming to be from London? Turns out they tracked it down to the kind of mastermind behind this was in Russia, and now Facebook says it has removed a network of accounts from Russia linked to the UK marketing firm that pushed anti-vaccine content. That's the headline. So I'm going to tweet that out now. And this is a huge issue, and Americans know this better than anyone. That it turns out that social networks where you can fake your identities can be used to cause civil unrest and all kinds of fighting, internal fighting around every issue that is fightable about, including Black Lives Matter, including defund the police, including anti-vaxxing, including this and that and that, and all of it. And it turns out time and time again, Russia and China are being called out for fanning the flames on these debates that Americans love to have. So it's really unfortunate, and it's causing a lot of division, and they need to come up with a solution for it. And seemingly one of the this leads to opens a whole new can of worms, obviously, but forcing everyone to have verified identities would solve a whole lot of that problem. Of course, it would introduce other new problems, and the question is, would the new problems be worse than the previous problems? And that's up for debate. But boy, they seem to have their hands full on the social media platforms dealing with, namely, they are naming the sources of these as being Russia and China. We had headlines previously from the head of Facebook's cybersecurity who just has their hands full battling with Russian and Chinese what we call AstroTurf and sock puppet accounts aimed at fanning the flames of division, specifically in the U.S. They're kind of weaponizing this, and there's actually a famous, now becoming internet meme video amongst geeks of a former Russian intelligence officer who defected and moved to the U.S. who predicted this in the 80s, that this is exactly right up in the playbook of how to cause division in the U.S., because that America cannot be defeated from externally, that it must be defeated internally. And so we're kind of falling into the plan as it is. So hopefully they are able to address it. It might require forcing identity verification on everybody to eventually, kind of cut the head off of that beast. Anyway,
Tyler, can I just add briefly just an end note to this? I think it really speaks to the importance of critical thinking skills as
for
well. I
sure.
mean, not to say that people who believe one way or the other are lacking. I have my own perceptions, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we all do. But I also think, we talk so much about ed tech and how people can learn online and learn kind of technical, pragmatic skills, but then there are other types of skills that are learned differently. And increasingly, I think that it's being cut out of the curriculum. So as people develop ed tech platforms, I think that, that needs to be part of the equation as well. Because if we lose the humanities, if we lose
100%.
the skill set that, we've developed over time, and we've just become these rote extensions of machines, then we're that much more susceptible as a society.
Tyler,
Yeah.
Tyler, I have a question for you related to this
Yeah.
topic. How much do you feel that the automation of society is also hindering the development of the critical thinking side of the brain, right? I mean, think about it. Back in the day when we grew up, and I think you mentioned this about your time in like Rosarita, down by Tijuana and
Yeah.
stuff like that. There's a lot of things that like we learn as we're growing up that are sort of just being street smart, right? Common sense is not a flower that grows on every bush, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at what point do you feel that this automation of a lot of the work efforts
Yeah.
will also dumb down people,
Yeah.
will also dumb people
It's a
down
good
and not
point.
allow critical thinking
Well,
to now not even allow critical thinking to
you're
be
right.
developed?
It's a great point. We need to start having that conversation, because we're delegating so much of our mental process to our gadgets. Hey Siri, is this our? You know what? Maybe that's the
We've become
solution.
robots,
Yeah, no.
Tyler.
What we need
Become
is,
robots.
hey Siri, please tell me, is this article trustworthy or not? Because I no longer have the capability of figuring it out. I need to delegate. We are developing a habit of just delegating our mental authority into other agents, and that's an interesting point.
It's
How
also
many
how can
how
Started
many
edtech
feeling
series
how
just went off right now? I'm
hey
sorry.
no, I mean, Tyler, and I think the main thing is that's exactly it. Like everyone talks about ed tech, ed tech, ed tech, ed tech, ed tech. Okay, let's be transparent. But at the end of the day, ed tech is also what's messing with people's brains, that they can't even critically think because they're not reading, they're not highlighting, they're not processing in the brain, they're not
But it's
even
also the
getting.
content, Ame.
Yeah,
It's
but the
the content
content.
about learning the humanities and learning different
Yeah,
languages
but
and learning things that
content.
are not.
But then we could all. But Lakeisha, we could go back to home economics, man. People don't know how to cook. They don't know how to sew. They
Yeah,
don't know how
yeah,
to
yeah,
iron
yeah,
clothing.
yeah.
I mean,
I'm, yeah,
girl, we could go straight down that rabbit hole.
Well, check this
absolutely.
out, May.
It's everything.
Well, there's also this, which is, I maybe is anyone else noticing this? Like, if the algorithms get smart enough, and the computer gets smart enough, and if you're a kid and you're on an ed tech platform, and you start to develop the sense that the computer knows more than I do, right? It's teaching me English, it's teaching me math, it's teaching me whatever. The computer knows more than I do. When you sit on Wikipedia, some part of you recognizes this computer has more information than I do. And you're watching YouTube and you're learning on YouTube, and you recognize, you know what? This computer knows far more than I do. And in reality, if you internally digest that point, that, what, this machine has the information and knows more than I do, unfortunately, when you go to bad information, you are willing to accept it as true when it's not. So, this happens with people as well, when you recognize on some level that some individual is more knowledgeable than you are. And so when they have a belief that you might think, well, they're smarter than I am, so maybe I should believe this thing that is clearly wrong. So when you find false information on the internet, you struggle with it. Some people do, because they have a hard time parsing that something that knows more than they do can actually be very wrong. There's a lot of wrong information on the internet as well. Tragically, tons of wrong information on the internet. And that goes back to the critical thinking point, whoever brought it up, May or whoever, which is
Yeah, it
we
was
need to
me.
be, or Lakeisha, we need to
Yeah, I
be
think it
able
was
to
me.
recognize the computer can know way more than we do and still have tons of incredibly bad, false, mistaken
Bef-
information.
but before, I think before
Ty,
critical thinking, you need critical discussion, and that's what's beautiful about this room is that if you notice, we don't argue in here much. There's things like I'll double click on that, I'm going to push back on that. But that's how you get this really that's how you get to critical thinking is you first need to be able to critically discuss without
Chris.
emotions getting in the way. And I'm sorry to
Chris,
jump over
no,
everybody.
no, Chris, but that's a really valid statement. And the last piece that you said is really poignant. And the poignant part is without emotion. But wait a second, time out. To present yourself in a passionate manner, there should be nothing wrong with someone to be able to be themselves. And this is also what mutes a lot of people in these audiences on Clubhouse because they get intimidated by the people that could speak better, present themselves better, and be eloquent in their speech, but then other people could also have really valuable things to say, but they may not have the vernacular to be able to deliver it in a way that may come across to someone as unemotional, quote unquote. Because at the end of the day, that's what makes people feel uncomfortable when they're put into a bucket. Oh, she's too emotional or he's too
I think I
distracted.
used the wrong word there. But yeah, I
But
know what you mean, Ame.
I know, I totally get that. You have children, but this is why I'm saying I believe it also has to be a cognitive piece as well. A cognitive development of the brain for people to understand that everyone is different and everyone will relay information in a different manner. And the key is to actively listen for understanding of the person who's delivering the message. And once you're able to get that, the judgment comes from our preconceived notions and our judgment of the other person before even knowing anything about them, just by their tonalities, by their person, whatever. We're a judging nation, right? If we could just get away from this judgment and give more compassion and empathy and emotional intelligence, we'd probably be a happier society, to be quite frank.
Okay, we got to get into the next headlines here. So thanks for the interesting thoughts as usual. The next big one, and this is really only number 3. Sources say that the NSA awarded a secret cloud computing contract worth up to $10 billion to Amazon Web Services. Microsoft has filed a bid protest with the GAO in response. Much of the NSA's most prized intelligence data may be moving to the cloud. And the NSA, which is the National Security Agency, has awarded a secret cloud contract worth $10 billion to Amazon. And Amazon and Microsoft are battling for these big government contracts as they move their infrastructure into the cloud. And so naturally, Microsoft is going to, as with everything in America, it goes to court. And anything and everything ends up in a court case. And that's just the nature of American life in 2021, where it says the NSA is awarded this and the contract is already being challenged. Tech giant Microsoft filed a bid protest on July 21 with the Government Accountability Office 2 weeks after being notified that the NSA that it had selected AWS for the contract. The contract's code name was Wild and Stormy, according to protest filings, and it represents the second multi-billion-dollar cloud contract that the U.S. intelligence community, made up of 17 agencies, including the NSA, has awarded in the past year. In November, the CIA awarded its contract, potentially worth tens of billions of dollars, to 5 companies: AWS, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, and IBM. Well, that's all the cloud companies right there. That would compete for specific task orders for certain intelligence needs. Details on NSA's newly awarded cloud contract are sparse. Anywho, so that naturally they're fighting over these huge contracts. And the next big article is from the Washington Post about court documents which show that Apple settles its 2019 lawsuit against Corellium over Corellium's quote unquote virtualized iPhone business. Corellium says it still sells virtual iOS devices. Apple accused Corellium of violating its copyrights with virtual iPhones used for security research. And so what you can do is run basically a simulator on your laptop of an iPhone rather than needing an actual physical phone. And this is very helpful for security folks. And Apple drops intellectual property lawsuit against the maker of security tools. Apple accused Corellium of violating its copyrights of virtual iPhones used for security research. So that's the headline there. I'll tweet that out, so anyone who wants to do the deep dive on that can at the Tech News Twitter account, TNATW. The next one is that Coinbase did its Q2 revenue. They're kind of the last in line of these quarter reports, and they reported $2.2 billion in quarter two revenue versus 1.78 estimate, which means they had a huge, way more than was expected by Wall Street in the estimate, and a net profit of 1.6 billion, up nearly 4,900% year over year. That's explosive growth that only a startup can do. And following a volatile stretch of cryptocurrency trading, and no doubt they'll have an uptick in their stock price as a result of that, very handedly beating the Wall Street's expectations for the quarter. The next one is super interesting, and we covered it live in this room in real time as it broke about 12 hours ago. OpenAI debuts a private beta for what they call Codex, an API for turning natural language into code of one of over a dozen coding languages. Codex powers GitHub's Copilot. And that's the headline. And we watched it live in this room not 12 hours, 14 hours ago. And it was a 30-minute live stream. I'm tweeting out the article now. You can watch the 30-minute video where basically two engineers from OpenAI sat down and said, hey, we have this new thing called Codex. Here's what it does. You can talk to it in text, like a chat bot, and it will create software and apps, and even they essentially made a video game in that 30 minutes, going super slow. You could have done it in 5 minutes if you replicated it yourself. And I'll just give you visually, kind of explain how it worked. They said, okay, hey computer, make me a website called Hello World, and put a man in the middle of the web page, and then put a rock at the top of the page, and then make the rock fall down to the bottom of the page. And then it made it. Boom. So instead of having to write the code, which what I just described would normally take you a few hours to code, it did in a few seconds, honestly, not even a few minutes. I mean, as fast as you could tell the computer what you wanted, it would build it. It would do the code for you, and it would show you the code that it made. So if you understood the code, you could edit the code later. And this was holy shit, wow, type of demo. And then what they did was they said, okay, now make the rock a little bit bigger or smaller. Okay, make it fall from the top of the web page to the bottom. When it reaches the bottom, make it come back to the top in any new random location. And now let me move the little man with my arrow keys on my keyboard. And it did all of that almost as fast as I just said it. And now they've made a video game. And if the rock hits the man, make the man die and say you lose, and make me start again. They essentially made a video game where you move a little man icon with your arrows on your keyboard, and a rock is falling from the top of the web page, and it tries to crush the guy at the bottom, and you avoid the rock. That's a video game. And they very easily could have said, okay, duplicate the rock 20 times and randomize them. And now you've got random rocks falling from the top of the screen, and you got to move. And then they could have said, give the man a gun and let him shoot at the rocks. And if he shoots the rock, make the rock disappear. And now you've basically got Galaga as fast as I just described it. That's how fast it was creating it. And then it got even crazier from there. So again, and you can do this by text input from your keyboard, or later in the example, they were just talking to it the same way I'm talking to you now, and it understood the speech perfectly. So you can just talk to the computer and make apps by talking to the computer, and it understood all kinds of words like it. Now move. So they would first say create a rock, and have it fall from the top of the screen. Now make it, move across the screen in a certain way. And the computer knew when you say it, you meant the rock. So it's understanding the semantic meaning of English in a way that computers normally don't. Truly, truly impressive demonstration. And then they took it one step further and went, okay, that's nice. Now they had two other demonstrations where they said, okay, um, join our email list at this web page, which I did. I went to the web page, put in my email address. I said, okay, hey, computer, send out an email blast to our email list on MailChimp. MailChimp is a separate web page, a separate company, which I use myself. My email list for my Swedish audience is on MailChimp, where I've got, I don't know, 40,000 people on my email list. They do too. And they said, okay, hey computer, send an email to everybody that says the price of Bitcoin and tell them the price of Bitcoin right now. And it did. 1 minute later, I get an email in my inbox that says, hey, Tyler, the price of Bitcoin is $41,000.98, whatever. Holy shit, wow. It figured out the price of Bitcoin, put it in an email, blasted it to MailChimp, sent it out to their entire email list through MailChimp, which is a separate app. Completely separate. And then they did one other one where they went to Microsoft Word, which is obviously a separate app that they don't control, but through their APIs, they said, okay, hey, Microsoft Word, here's a poem. Okay, now in this poem, bold the first line of every paragraph. Boom, done. Which you normally, that would be very difficult to do. You'd have to do that manually with your hand and highlight the first sentence of every paragraph and bold it. Where now you can just tell it, hey, here's this, very long paper, italicize every other word in this paper. You would never be able to do that normally. Boom, did it. It's just wild to think that now we've got this very intuitive AI with APIs into other apps that can also understand how to write code in several languages like JavaScript, which is a huge part of code writing these days is JavaScript, and Python, which is also one of the biggest programs. And between those two languages alone, you could pretty much build pretty much anything you really need between Python and JavaScript. So really mind-blowing demonstration. I was fantastic to watch that live with everybody here.
Well,
Tyler, we
raising
have Nicholas in the audience.
Yeah.
You want to bring him up?
Thank you. Eli?
raising the mind blowing to the third power. Python is a favorite language to wrap AI frameworks in, and so using this to write code that wraps other AI frameworks.
Yep. It's going to start
Yeah.
coding itself before long.
Well, the other mind-bending thing is what happens when you tell it to actually code Galaga for you. Is it a copyright infringement? I mean, at that time, because it learned Galaga, it wrote the code for Galaga probably in a different language than Galaga was originally written in.
Oh,
So,
that would be amazing.
what
Chris,
happens there?
what happens if you turn on a camera onto this thing and you show it Galaga and you say, hey, clone this?
Yeah, no, that's what I mean.
That's wild. Holy cow. Because normally if you want to clone an app, you have to explain the app, in intimate detail. Now you could in the very near future, here's a prediction. And this is, I've not heard any, maybe others have made this prediction, but if you could somehow give an AI through these APIs access to other apps like Instagram, and you're like, hey, AI, this is Instagram. Go inside of it, learn it, and replicate it. And boom, you've got a carbon copy of any app you can ever imagine, essentially. It would go in, learn all the behaviors, learn the code in the background, and make a carbon copy of an app. And now I've got not line for line perfect, but close enough. And maybe even in a different programming language, like maybe, Instagram's written in, Java, and then it, translates it into Python for you.
That's what I mean. So it wouldn't be subject to DCMA,
Right.
the Digital Copyright Millennium
Right.
Act, right? So,
oh, this is
oh
wild.
gosh.
Because then
And then
you're
it
not
would
starting
power the.
from zero when you want to build something. You can say, for example, build me a video game like Galaga, but do this and this and this and this, and instead of using aliens, use honeybees, or instead of honeybees, use vegetables, and make something like Candy Crush, but instead of X, do Y. And so now, because that's a lot of what innovation is about, is you're not coming up with a new idea out of a vacuum unless you're an absolute true genius. You're normally taking pre-existing things and improving them in some sense.
Does that really work?
It's very likely to work. This is the point.
Oh, great. Oh, no.
Or
Everybody's,
even,
everyone will look like the same as everyone now.
No, not
I
or
mean, this is remixing.
yeah, it's remixing, but that's a lot of what innovation is, anyways. Whether the creator admits it or not, there's very few truly novel ideas. A lot of the ideas that happen on a day to day basis are any video game new video game that comes out of the App Store today. You're going to be able to find existing video games that are some way relevant to that new one.
the product market fit's already been established in
Well,
many cases, right? So
let's use songs. Nearly any song that comes out new today is in some way built on top of previous songs, right? Either whether that it was the formation of the instruments, or the mechanics of verse, chorus, outro, bridge, verse, chorus, or there's a system to how songs are made, and that's sort of the point. So anyway, but it's wild. It was a fantastic demonstration that they gave.
I'm just glad that the entry point is lower now, and then even young
Oh,
kids can start to learn
thank
how to
you.
code at it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for the reminder. It absolutely, to me, one of my first big takeaway from watching these was, holy cow, now kids can talk to a computer and say, hey, computer, make me a unicorn on a web page, and make the unicorn jump on top of this rock, and have it dance. Every time I say dance, the unicorn dances, and it will do that. And now kids can get excited about creating on computers, either verbally or through simple text, as a sort of entryway to learning how to code a computer. Because kids don't quite have the patience to learn Python or JavaScript, although this is a gateway drug essentially, because as soon as they learn how to do that, they'll get very interested in the code in the background and how to optimize it and tweak it, and etc. So I'm wildly optimistic about how this is going to be used in classrooms in the very near future.
Tyler,
Yes.
this is also what's happening with NFTs. Like, children are getting really excited, or young adults are getting really excited about the art and the coding of art. And it is what's making them sort of get inspired to solve the problems. And in essence, that's developing their critical thinking in a different perspective, right? Because it's enticing them by the output, and then their natural childlike curiosity will make them want to keep on digging in deeper if it's something of interest to them. And that's, I think, where you can see a different way of how children.
Okay, so Jamie has a hand up, I think, wants to make a point on this one. There was someone in the audience wanted to make a point, so just inviting Jamie up here. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Tyler.
Hey.
Thanks for bringing me
Sure.
up. Just wanted to ask. I missed the name of the tech. What is this?
It's
And is it
called
available today?
OpenAI is the research team, which was kicked off by Elon Musk and Sam from Y Combinator and a few others. Then Microsoft put in $1 billion, and this new thing they're calling Codex, CODEX, and you can register to play with it at openai.com/join, if I recall, was the URL.
Yes, I think they're still on waiting list, so I sign up as well.
Yeah. And so this is based on, in some way, GPT-3, which is a human language where they fed basically all of the English internet into an AI, and now it kind of understands English, almost at a native English speaker level. Yeah, better than some English speakers I know, honestly. So, GPT-3 has been used in many interesting ways. For example, where you can tell it to, for example, given, please, here's the text of Moby Dick the book. Please write me a summary of the book. boom, instantly in 3 seconds, it writes a 2-paragraph summary of Moby Dick in a way that's better than most Americans today could do. It does that. That's now. So they're working on GPT-4, and Elon has hinted, when we get to GPT-4, it will be better than nearly every human at doing things. And then you can say, hey, GPT-4, what's going on? Write me an article about what's happening in Afghanistan at the moment. And it would go search the web of all the popular news articles from Bloomberg and Newsweek and everywhere else, Al Jazeera, suck in all of what's happening today in Afghanistan, and write a post for you. Now you don't need a journalist. You just wrote a very comprehensive blog post about news of what's happening in Afghanistan. That's what we're expecting in GPT-4. So it could potentially challenge the need for much of what happens in journalism, and that's where it gets really concerning. So, to some degree, not all journalism, of course, it's not actually doing investigation, true investigation, but it's going to. In fact, there have been articles written, and the headline was, "This article was written without a journalist," and you can Google that article and read it, and you'll be impressed with the kind of level of English mastery that it has, of grammar and whatnot. So once we add, now that this new innovation, Codex, is built on top of GPT-3, what happens when Codex is built on top of GPT-4, which is coming soon? That's just, again, blows the mind. Its ability to understand what you mean, the computer's ability to understand what you mean. We're approaching the Star Trek, where the Commander Picard is talking to the voice computer inside of the spaceship. In the not so distant future, the computer is going to be able to understand better than most humans what you want. And at that point, are you going to hire a human developer to write your app, or are you just going to tell the computer, because the computer understands what you want better than the human does? So that's why a bunch of developers who were watching this demonstration live with us last night were commenting in the chat room, why did I spend the last 5 years becoming a software developer? I'm screwed. This is going to replace us in the not so distant future. And they have a bit of a point, especially for kind of front end engineering, for what we call front end. So it's going to be very interesting to watch how this unfolds. Okay. So the next biggest headline at this very moment, I tweeted out the link to the OpenAI article in VentureBeat, and of course, a lot of other people are talking about it on Twitter as well. And one person, Alex McCaw, says on Twitter, "I love what OpenAI is doing with code generation. It's understandable to feel defensive about something that appears competitive, but ultimately, we programmers should be the first to realize everything will be automated, will be just fine." And so that's a developer even acknowledging that, like, people are starting to feel threatened. But of course, the developers more than anyone understand that's the nature of this game. And it says, another guy, Kyle Russell, says on Twitter, "We're on a path towards Siri-like interactions, dynamically writing and running code to accomplish a desired task." And that's kind of well said as well. So the next big headline at this moment is that Google will let under 18-year-olds, meaning minors, as we call them, delist photos of themselves from Google's database by request. That's unprecedented. That's really ungoogly. Google's really never, ever done anything like that. And they've fought anything like that quite viciously in the past, which begs the question, why is Google doing this? And who is this Google's own internal decision to do this? Because this is really out of character for Google to do something like this. And I posited the thought that perhaps the US government is suggesting Google do this. And by the way, here's why I think that. And I think I have let's look at a little bit of the anecdotal evidence at our disposal. Simultaneous to making this announcement, which they just made, 12 hours ago, Google will also no longer allow ad targeting of children based on their age and gender and geography and their interests. Well, that's interesting because that's also really against their own interests as an ad network. And more interestingly, Facebook essentially did the same 4 days ago. Wow, that's a really bizarre coincidence that the two biggest digital ad networks, Facebook and Google, both simultaneously decided they're not going to target children under the same age. What are the odds of that? Just on that both companies would both do something they both fought against for their entire histories. They both on the same day decide to announce the same thing, that they're what is that you think they both did that separately internally on their own without any kind of outside influencer? No, the odds of that are
Sorry to
incredibly
interrupt,
low.
but
Huh?
I find this highly unbelievable, Tyler. And how are they even gonna check on this? How would they be able to check on
Yeah,
this?
how do they know you're under
Forgive
18
my
is a great
ignorance.
question. Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, people they assume are under 18 anyways. Facebook can do it because they actually you put in your birth date into Facebook. So they actually have that data point. Google, they don't. So they're having to infer that age information. It's a good point.
Is this because COPPA, which was basically it covered children under 13, like that's why websites have this disclaimer, I'm over age 12. So there's this gap between 12 and 18, right? And that's kind of where it was kind of no man's land, right?
Right. So I'm tweeting out the link to this article so you can read it for yourself, but there's more. There's more anecdotal evidence that happened to come out
I'll
simultaneously.
just interject to let
Yeah,
you
go
know
ahead, Ken.
that, like, I don't know the understanding how the underlying technology works, but a lot of online gambling sites have this age verification thing, and they're able, to either use other types of public documents or something to verify your age to figure out whether you're old enough to, to be online. So they do age verification over the internet, because at one point there was a thing about, well, if we're going to allow online gambling, you may have to go to a physical bricks and mortar site to, like, show your ID and prove, that you're usually 21. But there's a way that they could do it now. I'm not sure what the underlying technology is.
Right. So here's the
But
next little.
doesn't it go all together with the whole idea of identity verification, that as the governments pursue more identity verification through the platforms, then that would work anyway. Plus, all
Unless
of
they're
the
using
KYC methods
Mm-hmm,
are already there, right?
mm-hmm,
You just upload your ID and you're done.
mm-hmm,
So
unless they use facial recognition again, somehow, this is not going to happen.
mm-hmm.
That's my 2 cents worth.
Just one more thing related to what was said about gambling and ID. That's a little known secret about what was driving things in Sweden. Casino.com happened to get into the ownership of a couple of Swedish guys in the in about 97, 98, and they were, let's just say, very successful and very involved in because gambling and porn has driven a whole lot of technical development,
Mm-hmm.
and they were at the cutting edge of that. They didn't run it from Sweden because
Malta, yeah.
no,
No.
Antigua, I think,
Oh.
if I recall correctly. So it was very much there. But just as an additional point to what Sweden was at the very cutting edge of a whole lot of things, and some things that were not associated with Sweden. But even porn was a driving thing from there. But those are things that are not that much talked about. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to
No
interrupt, but
problem. So check this out. There's another interesting anecdotal data point to consider, which is simultaneous to this announcement, YouTube, which is owned by Google, launches something new, which to protect kids. Oh, wow. Interesting coincidence again with the kids. Default private uploads. So they have to manually turn on that the video becomes public. Also turning off autoplay. So they don't, when they come to a video, it doesn't automatically play. That is really interesting because Google, YouTube intentionally auto plays the next video, the next video, the next video, because when you're a child watching cartoons, it wants to just keep playing them endlessly so that it doesn't force you to interrupt your hypnosis session to click play. because they want long average viewing times, because they want to be able to show advertisers that the average viewing time is 4 hours, not 4 minutes. So forcing you to click play on each new video, is going to have a huge, tremendous impact on your average viewing time. So because you're likely to, open up a different app or whatever rather than click play on the next video. Also, people all often fall asleep with a YouTube video playing, and you wake up 4 hours later and it's playing, 10 videos later. And so anyway, so to turn off autoplay is really against their own interests. They've fought very hard against that. And now they're adding what they call take a break and bedtime reminders for kids. Say what? That is really against their own interests and against their own kind of corporate policies of things. Asking people to take a break from YouTube? Say what? That is exactly the opposite of what they've been trying to do since 2007. What's going on that these companies simultaneously have these very pro under 18 policies all at the same time? YouTube, Google, Facebook. Again, YouTube is Google. And so we were reading yesterday about a separate article about Facebook and the White House, from the New York Times, mind you. So we can, have a high degree of feasibility that this information is accurate, where the New York Times says that for many weeks, Mr. Slavitt, who is Andy Slavitt, the top pandemic advisor to President Biden. Okay, so a top advisor to Biden called somebody named Nick Clegg, who's Facebook's vice president of global affairs. So that's who would talk between the Biden administration and Facebook. Facebook's vice president of global affairs is talking with one of Biden's top advisors, Slavitt. So Slavitt and Clegg, right? So for many weeks, Slavitt and other White House officials had been meeting with Facebook to urge the company to stop spread of misinformation, blah, blah, blah. And then this article goes on to talk about how Slavitt and Clegg, meaning Biden and Facebook, have been meeting regularly for months. Very, very regularly, on all the time. They're DMing, they're the article from the New York Times even says that they're direct messaging each other. They're meeting constantly. And this is the point. Facebook and Apple and Google are constantly meeting with the Biden administration, ongoing, constantly, especially recently,
I
because
think it should be noted that Nick Clegg is former Deputy Prime Minister of the UK and the leader of the Liberal Party, which essentially caused the debacle that was the Brexit.
So particularly interest that recently they're talking a lot because America has 5 new bills coming through the Senate and the House of Representatives aimed at reining in the power of the big tech companies. We talked about these when they were announced, a month ago. And now big tech is understandably very anxious and nervous and meeting as much as possible with the power players in Washington, D.C. to convince them to not pull the gun out and shoot them all, and so it's these big tech companies are more than ever hyper engaged with the power players in Washington, D.C. So no doubt they're
The
meeting
revolving
constantly.
door, though, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
a revolving door. You
Yes.
had that with Binance CEO, with Coinbase's head of securities. You basically go and work at some government organization, regulate these people, and then join their board and get paid millions of dollars and corrupt the system.
Here's my point is it a coincidence then that while after these bills came out a month ago, now we're starting to see Apple willing to scan your device for children photos, and Facebook stops, last week says we're going to stop doing advertising to kids, and then Google 4 days later says we're going to stop advertising to kids, and then YouTube comes out and says we're going to stop make policies more friendly to kids. Who's what? You got Apple, Facebook, and Google all in the same simultaneously doing things that are wildly uncharacteristic and almost the opposite of what they've been doing. Apple doing this child photo scanning thing on your device, that is so opposite,
Unprecedented.
unprecedentedly opposite of the privacy, all caps, bold, italicized, underlined, 180 pixel font, privacy at all cost privacy. We don't want to know what you're doing on your device. This has been Apple's position. Their main marketing position of their company has been for the past decade. Privacy. We are the privacy company. We don't want to know what you're doing on your phones. And if the government comes and asks us, we're going to go tell them to go fuck themselves, because we built the device so that we don't know and we can't know even if Uncle Sam comes asking. That's been their position for the past 10 years. And now, magically, simultaneously, Apple, Facebook, Google, YouTube, all simultaneously. Oh, by the way, they're all now, ever for the past month, having endless conversations with the power players in Washington, D.C. about trying to talk, the power players in America to not be so aggressive towards the big tech companies, because that's what the bills are aimed at doing, is reducing the power of the big tech companies. And now they're all doing things that clearly don't seem to be internally motivated. It seems like these are things that the government are asking them to do. Okay, I have no problem with that. They're not transparent about that. They're not saying,
Almost like they allowed them to go into the finance business in return for submitting themselves to surveillance monitoring.
No, but there's another thing here, Tyler. Who was the first one that did this before all of them? There's an underlying trend that's coming from the Far East.
oh, you mean when China did all that?
It was Tencent that started all of this around the kiddie bedtime.
Yeah, with the lamps and whatnot.
No, it was Tencent video games and Tencent and Tencent.
yes,
It
simultaneous.
started
Yeah,
there, and
you're
then
right.
and then it came here.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking days apart, though. So, very interestingly, China is also at the same time, although much faster and much more transparently, China's telling the game companies, limit your, the kids can't, the video games are a poison of the mind. And so the gaming company's like, okay, well noted, boss. Hey, everybody, you can only play 1 hour of video games per day now for people under 18. Yeah.
I'll speak for Charles. It's not such a bad thing to stop the mind polluting poison known as video game. I'm sorry, Charles, but it really isn't a bad thing to limit all these things. I mean, my little 2-year-old, going to be 3-year-old, is addicted to YouTube. I really hate to say it.
Yeah, my point isn't what's good or bad in this. My point is the lack of why can't these companies just say, hey, the government's in our secret meeting that we had last week, where we're talking about, hey, please don't pass these big 5 bills aimed at killing our companies. They happen to mention it would be really nice if we started scanning all the devices for child abuse imagery. And so we've decided to do it. And thank you to the Joe Biden administration for proposing the idea, and we thought it's a great idea, and so we're going to do it.
Because
It's not
Tyler,
too
it's
late
not the
to realize
Communist
who is the
Party.
boss.
It's not the Communist. It's not the Communist Party of China. It's the United States of America. That's why they can't say that.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is they've gotten so much pushback in the case of Apple that, and they've said, well, if it was Apple's own internal idea to do that, the amount of pushback that they've got is kind of also unprecedented, and they would at least consider it. And at this point, it's not up for debate because it wasn't internally inspired. It's being kind of driven from the top down. So there's no chance to challenge it, essentially, because it's not Apple's own initiative internally. That's my.
And another thing, if China want them to disclose anything, they can't say no anyway.
Well, in China, right? And then in the U.S., the question is, This is thank you, Cheryl. This is the bigger point. The bigger point is we're now for the first time seeing potentially, we don't know for sure. I'll be the first to admit this is a wild conspiracy theory. Make your own decisions. But
X-Files.
Yeah, I'm literally reaching for the X-Files audio clip as I say this, that basically we're now starting to see the U.S. government do with the big U.S. tech companies to a similar degree what China does with its tech companies, what India's doing to other big tech companies, and kind of putting them in uncomfortable positions that where they are very accustomed to doing whatever they want whenever they want. and now they're doing the opposite of what they used to do or want. And it looks like the government is now flexing on these big tech companies and figuring out scenarios that they're willing to compromise. And that has what we need to be mindful of is it doesn't really matter. And again, I would agree with you, Chris, and in your projection onto we know what Charles would say was, yeah, that what there's this isn't necessarily a bad thing that we're reducing, advertising to kids. Okay, yeah, that's not the point. The point is, if this is kind of shadowy influences on behalf of the government on the big tech companies, where will it stop? That's the bigger interesting question.
Well,
And
essentially, the thing is essentially data today is like oil and gas back in the day. So the regulation will only be stronger because this is where like data is gold today. So that's what they want. And if they cannot keep tabs on where the money is made, what's the point of the government, right?
There's another thing going on, Tyler. I was reading a very interesting piece this morning, which was about the number of billionaires in the world and how the largest number now exists in China, which is over 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And the US is second to that, I think. And the interesting conspiracy theory in that opinion paper was that as the governments are being challenged by the average citizen, saying that the governments are being run by these billionaires and doing whatever these billionaires require, there's increasing pressure on both governments in the United States and in China to show that they're actually not being run by these big tech companies and by these big tech players, whether it be in China or Asia. And hence, that's a big play of what Xi Jinping is doing in China towards the coming of his third turn in running the country, to show that the Communist Party is not being controlled by these billionaires. And that's what the United States of America might also be doing in showing the big tech isn't exactly controlling the government, with all the various discussions that we've had prior to this one, where big tech essentially controls a lot of legislation by simply hiring lobbyists and paying off people vis-a-vis different means of, not calling it bribery, but essentially a legal way of bribery.
Okay.
So that might be something interesting to look at.
Okay. So the next big story at this moment is about the Senate sends the $1 trillion infrastructure bill to the House after passing the Senate 69-30 vote. The bill contains, and then the reason that geeks care about this is because this massive infrastructure bill, 2,000-page bill, happens to contain a few paragraphs about cryptocurrencies. And the bill contains a controversial cryptocurrency tax provision critics see as too broad because it's going to force everybody who touches anything to do with crypto to comply with the IRS and under what is the technical definitions and very broad definitions of what they call a broker, which is basically anyone who transfers anything of value of any kind to anybody, and the IRS wants to tax that. And that includes anybody doing anything with anything crypto. And then you need to, like any business who does anything of value, off of the blockchains, when you do transactions of value, you have to record that transaction, including the names and addresses on a IRS form called the 1099, and you have to submit that into the IRS so they can see all the transactions of values, and so they can tax it. And now they're saying, yeah, you're going to have to do that in crypto land too. Everyone doing anything in crypto land has to record 1099 documents for the IRS, which includes their name and their address and everything else, and send it on in. Thank you very much. And
Tyler?
this is likely going to force a lot of crypto people to move out of the US so they don't need to comply with this, but then they will likely have to move somewhere where there's non-extradition treaties with the US, because the IRS has very long arms into other governments where if they feel like you are tax avoiding. By the way, recent case in point is John McAfee, who they were going after specifically for tax avoidance relating to crypto. And he was in Spain, and they got Spain to arrest him and put him in a jail and then extradite him back to America. And then he mysteriously died in the Spanish jail cell an hours after the Spanish judge ruled that he does need to be sent back to America per America's request to extradite him for tax avoidance on cryptocurrencies. So anyone doing anything in crypto and the IRS feels that you're doing any kind of avoidance, don't go to Spain. There's the lesson right there. Don't go to
Tyler?
Spain. Hold on. So you
Tyler, can you
Sorry.
bring Vinay up?
Sure. So then, but don't interrupt. Don't tell me to bring somebody up in the middle of a sentence, please. So
Sorry.
wait till the end of a sentence. So the point is, don't go to Spain and don't go to any country that has an extradition treaty with America, which is nearly every country. There are actually only a few countries that don't have extradition treaties with America, and they are Chad,
Or build
South
truly
Sudan,
decentralized
Russia,
technologies.
and Moldova are four that you.
Moldova.
Yeah. So we're all going to Moldova. I hope you join us. They are
Vinay
opening
to the
up a Subway
rescue.
sandwich in the near future. So I'll bring up Vinay and
Hey,
who.
Tyler.
Yeah, hold on. I think
I was
Nicholas
gonna.
was trying to make
Okay,
a point real quick, and then we'll go to you, Ame.
sure. Thank.
I was just going to say that there is a way to comply, and that is to build truly decentralized technologies that are owned and self-sovereign at the individual level. Those will be in compliance. So the rules that are written, it should be understood that the government will try to tax every single thing, and the question is, where does the limit of the government stop? And that applies to everything you were saying about all surveillance in all domains, and that's really the choice that they are drawing the line. And it should be noted that they didn't include any amendments. They basically played lip service, and they just said, listen, the Treasury rules here, and you guys need to understand that the Treasury is coming for you.
Okay,
Hold on. Ame was next there. We'll go to you, Ken.
I was literally just going to say, Nicholas is obviously pretty spot on with some of these, absolutely, with a lot of these comments. The one thing that is very interesting, Tyler, to your point about the IRS has already been doing this. If you take a look at the new IRS form, the one from this year, post-COVID, the form got updated very subtly. And it's on line 7. It says, it's a very fine print, yes or no checkbox. It says, have you received, exchanged, or sent any digital assets, right? And it just asks for yes or no. And actually for the past, it's very cheeky because
So
it's right
innocent.
above the signature. Yeah, it's very sneaky. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's a new form. It's really funny
Oh, and
because it's a revised form.
if you lie, you go to jail. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. But the point is that it's very interesting because for the past year and a half, I've been trained by a CPA from DC to help fill out the form that's already been developed, the 8959, which is exactly the form that I'm filling out with those folks that are not going to be playing with the IRS to identify their movements of their tokens, right? And it's like basically you take all the tokens, and there's about 4 or 5 companies that are doing this already really good. And pretty much I help my clients or the people I know fill out the 8959 form, which is the form that rolls up into your 1040 form, right? It rolls up into it. And it is up to the CPA, your accountants. There's a lot of gray area, but they definitely have stated that any movement, and everyone keeps on getting this wrong, and I just keep on shutting up because I've studied with the IRS. Any movement of a token back, I don't care if they don't care if there is a gain or a loss, they don't care. They want you to keep track of every single transaction, which is why these companies, like Coin Accountally or Coin, the ones that Ben and I have mentioned a number of times. That's why those companies are actually going to be really interesting companies to invest in because they are providing that information so it fills in nicely to the forms of the IRS, and so the CPAs could have no nightmare in compiling all these daily transactions if someone's moving tokens crazy, right? Because they are requiring these details. And I learned from a CPA from DC, and he owns a firm, and he's like, look, people, don't think that it doesn't have to be this detailed, but it does. They're not asking for it yet, but if they come back, like you just said, Tyler, and they come back and ask, you better have that ready for them because that's all they're doing. They said that they're not gonna, the accountants that I've spoken to said, just say yes. Tyler, they said the same exact thing. They said, just say yes, because they're not going to be too much right now, but if they have to come after you, that's when it's going to be a little bit more of a harder smack on the wrist. It's like when your parent tells you not to do something and you do it anyway, and then you get a shoe in your face, or like a shoe or the belt. It's like, look, at the end of the day, we're slightly being indirectly like given the heads up, and it's now for us to choose because IRS is a reporting on our own. It's you choose, you report. So they're just leaning back a bit. And it is literally, if you look at the new IRS digital form, you'll see it, Tyler, right above the signature line. It's very faint.
Okay.
It's a thin line. It's
It's I just really want to put some dose of reality on some of this stuff because, like, um, so the reason there were no amendments was not like some grand conspiracy. There were a lot of amendments they couldn't get to because of all the Senate rules just to get the bill out the door.
Hmm.
So it's not. It wasn't just like, oh, we didn't deal with the crypto. They didn't deal with a lot of things.
Right.
That's number two. They're talking about with this crypto stuff, or what their intent is not to like have a special tax on crypto. They just want reporting, so like there are for other things, to make sure that if you make a profit on something, that you're reporting the profit.
Yeah.
Okay. So
exactly correct.
okay, yeah, okay,
I appreciate the
and by
clarity. Yeah, it's not like there's some. I'm not trying to
It's no
make. I'm
drama.
not trying to make the over dramatize what they want to treat crypto the same as non crypto transactions, basically.
right, in the form that Amy referenced is a Social Security self-employment tax, I believe, which is because if you're self-employed, because you don't have an employer, they want you to pay into the Social Security system, and there's a Social Security self-employment tax, and it's a form, I think, to do that. I mean,
No, the 8959 is a new form, is a updated form, Ken. It's actually one that if you Google it, 8959, it's to tag digital assets. It's how you note everything down and how you put it in its list form.
actually, but you know what? I actually did Google it, and it says it's a Medicare self-employment tax. So I don't
I
know.
might be saying that I might have a dyslexia with the number, but I'll double check it, Ken, and if it could be my mistake. So I'll double check the number.
Okay, so the next headline here, no doubt that drama is going to continue because it has to go. It still has to go. It went from the Senate, where there's 100 senators who vote on these things, and now it goes over to House.
But another point I want to make: this bill will never become law. So what everyone's worried about. Let me explain very quickly why this law is not going to happen. There's a second bill, okay, that the progressive Democrats want, that of what they call human infrastructure, that costs 2 or 3 times what this bill does. No Republican is going to vote for it. They're going to try to get it through the Senate under a process called reconciliation that doesn't require the 60 votes. But there's not even enough Democratic votes yet. But even if they get it through the Senate, um, and I don't think they're going to get it through the Senate. But Nancy Pelosi has said she's not going to take up either bill. She's not going to take up this bill unless the other bill also comes over to the House.
Oh,
So because the progressives, like AOC, are saying, if we don't get what we want, we're not going to
They're
let.
holding it hostage,
ah,
Ken.
okay,
Okay,
because Biden took to Twitter to say the bipartisan infrastructure bill has officially passed the Senate. I hope Congress will send it to my desk as soon as possible so we can continue our work building it back better. But maybe that's just a PR tweet.
no. What he desires, but and the reality is he kind of got squeezed, and kind of like trying to say, yeah, I'm going to only do it if I get the second bill, but he has not been as specific as Nancy Pelosi. Now, I should point out that House moderate Democrats are pressuring Pelosi to bring the bill that just passed the Senate today to an immediate vote in the House because they want to make sure it actually passes because they're concerned that if you have to wait for the second bill, okay, that there may never be a second bill because, like Senator Sinema said, she's not going to be the 50th vote to pass it. So in the Senate, so it may not even make it over
To
to
the
the
House.
House.
Right. Okay.
And the House has a very thin majority of
Yeah,
Democrats. They only have,
incredibly thin. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So
And they took out a lot of the climate stuff in, and they put in, I think, 25 billion to fossil fuel subsidies the day after the IPCC report came out saying we have to act urgently on climate. So it's pretty screwed up all around.
Oh, and one quick last point. Amy she mentioned about this thing on the you have to check a box, yes or no. That's the same question they ask if you have foreign bank accounts that they've been asking for years and years. So they're not, again, it's not like punishing crypto. It's just making crypto kind
Aware.
of the same stuff that everybody else has to do.
Ken, and it was 8949, my bad. It was 8949 form, which is the capital assets. It's just them listing it. So you're absolutely correct, Ken. This is just a friendly awareness.
Okay, so the next big headline at this very moment is the information, which is a interesting blog that covers the politics of tech and stuff, say they have sources that the FTC is reviewing Uber's partnership with a delivery startup called GoPuff, which we've talked about here, how it's exploding all over the US at the moment. And it just, by the way, happened to acquire GoPuff acquired a coffee shop started by a former Uber team member in Austin, Texas last week. Interesting coincidence. And now the FTC, anyways, is reviewing the Uber partnership with delivery startup GoPuff on anti-competitive grounds, as well as its purchase of alcohol delivery firm Drizzly. And this is really interesting because this is not an acquisition. Uber hasn't acquired them, nor have they invested in them. It's purely a partnership. So why is the FTC reviewing a partnership between two tech companies? And to be continued. But basically, I'm going to come in with my own conspiracy theory here, that these delivery, the powers that be are starting to recognize, as I have myself recently, just how powerful these apps where people are going to be ordering stuff like GoPuff is starting to become the place where people, when you want something, you used to walk down to 7-Eleven and buy it. Now what's happening is people are opening up their phone and going to GoPuff and clicking, send me this stuff in 10 minutes. That's fine. 7-Eleven is starting to realize, oh shit, they're coming into our 7-Eleven. The app, once you order on GoPuff comes into the 7-Eleven, buys the thing, delivers it to your customer. 7-Eleven doesn't really care. They got a customer one way or the other. It doesn't make a difference. Although it does, because if GoPuff decides, we could build our own 7-Eleven as a warehouse outside of town for half the rent or 1/10 the rent on the outskirts of town, power the thing with robots, now we have much better margins. In the near future, these apps that receive the order from the customer owns the relationship, owns the order, and now 7-Eleven could die very quickly because all their customers are ordering through this app, and the app has the control of the relationship with the customer and the money. Bye-bye 7-Elevens if everyone's ordering through the apps. Bye-bye supermarkets. If GoPuff decides, you know what, we could also build the supermarket. And this is Instacart, by the way. So Instacart was going into supermarkets, taking the orders out of the supermarkets, delivering it to people. And then they realized, hey, why don't we build our own supermarket? Why don't we build a robot supermarket on the outside of town and stop going to the supermarkets? We get much better margins, much better control of the inventory, et cetera, et cetera. And so now you see the importance of these apps that are taking your order and your money, and they are going to decide where they fulfill that order. And of course, long term, they're going to fulfill that order themselves and cut out the middleman, which is the supermarket or the 7-Eleven. And eventually, these ordering apps are going to offer coffee and bye-bye Starbucks. And then they're going to allow you to order all kinds of stuff, right? And these apps are going to become incredibly powerful, and people are waking up. And I think the FTC, that's what the FTC is in the nature of making sure of stopping monopolies. So why are they concerned about Uber Eats or Uber partnering with GoPuff? Well, because they realize, I believe, this is my conspiracy theory, that the supermarkets and the 7-Elevens and the traditional power players are whispering in their ear, holy shit, these guys can take us out in the next 5 years if left unchecked. Ken? So anyway, that's my take on it. I will tweet this out about the Uber GoPuff partnership. And by the way, GoPuff did just acquire a coffee shop in Austin, Texas to do all the coffee. So now it's just one coffee shop for all of Austin, Texas if you're ordering through GoPuff. So, interesting point of how this food ordering stuff can play out over time. The next is, and it's like data in geeks being able to take over supermarkets with better logistics, robot-powered warehouses on the outside of town with way cheaper rent without humans, especially unionized humans, as is in the case of U.S. supermarkets, where largely they have unionized labor. And now you've got ununionized, unhuman robots doing the fulfillment and automated. And in the not-so-distant future, the delivery itself will be automated through autonomous vehicles. And the supermarkets just will not be able to compete, period. Or the 7-Elevens, or any retail store for that matter. Yes, go ahead, LS.
Yeah, I was just saying, good to see you guys again. On the FTC point, I think more people will find, and not just so from the grocery side, when you're partnering with bigger companies, it can be an issue because if you're a startup, excuse me, and you have certain unique tech, you can monopolize the market. And what I mean by that is I'm in discussions with some partnerships, very preliminary, of a telco that's very significant. And so when you start talking 5G and AI and stuff, I think the FTC is starting to read the roadmap of what could become if that startup, and in most startups, I believe, and in smaller companies would rather remain independent, funding, et cetera. But unfortunately, the catch 22 for startups and everything else is you get to a run rate and how much capital, et cetera, et cetera. What do you do? And so I think the FTC is concerned about consolidation in a
Yeah.
macro
Yep.
level, where Facebook's done this, where it was peculiar to me that one of the top people, this is one of the senior people at a very large tech co, said, "Oh, it's good to have you on the radar, LS." And that scared the F out of me when he wrote me back. I mean, radar? I was like, what? Am I target? I was looking for a partnership. And he's like, we don't have this, but you're on my radar. And so, it's scary. So, yeah, but I think, you have to continue to grow and fun, and it's a catch 22. And so I think you're going to see more of this in all spaces as this AI as a service, tech, first, local delivery, drones, just in time inventory, everything. You're just going to see this growth in the next 5 to 10 years of $1 trillion service industry, augmented by AI. And it's just going to who controls it and who doesn't. And so that's all I would
Breaking
add.
news.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
The Senate passes Democrats' budget outlining $3.5 trillion for social and climate efforts, said the President Joe Biden's domestic priorities advance in Congress. So they have passed the budget for $3.5 trillion.
Okay.
I think
Is that the one that's supposed to piggyback with the other one?
Yeah,
yeah,
he said it would pass this week. He said it would pass this week.
Yes,
And
pass,
so,
pass. It's passed.
yeah,
It's just
yeah.
breaking news.
It'll go to the House now, and it'll be passed, in my belief, before Saturday. That's just my opinion, LS. But I think the House will pass this. You'll hear a lot of dancing, but I think it will pass before Saturday.
Okay. Next biggest story at this moment is Apple plans a modest iPhone update for their next iPhone, which they traditionally do that first week of September, first or second week of September, usually around September 8th, 9th, 10th. We're expecting the date announcement any day now, so that all the journalists can focus and tune in for their big annual iPhone launch event. We don't even know if it's called iPhone 12s or iPhone 13, but what we do know is it's a relatively modest update this year. However, one very notable update, it's going to have a smaller notch at the top of the phone in an era when people are removing their notches on the Chinese phones altogether. It's going to have faster refresh rate, which they have to do because everyone's moving to 120 hertz refresh rate, which makes the phone feel far more real and instantaneous and much better experience. And then a very notable camera upgrades specifically to the selfie side of the camera. And I'm my conspiracy theory is that the upgrade on that camera on the selfie side, of course, they're going to tell you it's because you'll take better selfies, and it'll be used for unlocking your phone in the face. They'll position all kinds of interesting things. What they won't tell you is that if that camera is as good as the camera in the iPad Pro, the people who have reviewed that device say that that camera is now capable of doing indeed biometric identity of you, but not from your face, but from your iris, and also can detect your age and your gender, not from your face, but from your iris, and also your physical health conditions like your concussion, chronic pain, vision disorders, obesity, Parkinson's disease, or your mental health like depression, PTSD, autism, and eating disorders, personality traits of extroversion, neuroticism, curiosity, skills and abilities like and levels of sleepiness or drug consumption, alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, MDMA, cannabis, and mental workload and cognitive processes, not to mention algorithms that can now detect early stages of heart disease from your iris. And that's really interesting data that they'll likely be able to get with this new upgraded selfie camera that they're probably not going to tell you during their demonstration of these new cameras in your devices, including the new iPad, which are in the iPad Pro, but also no doubt coming to all their devices, like the new MacBook 14 and 16, which they might also reveal at this event. But the big marquee product that they always showcase, of course, is the iPhone. And faster refresh rate. They have to do that to stay up to speed with all the non-Apple phones. And with a smaller notch, again, they have to do. Yeah.
Tyler, are you suggesting they're going to take that data without permission?
No, it's gonna be in 3-point font, and you're gonna click I agree, as you always do. So the next big headline is from Venmo. Will let credit card holders automatically buy cryptocurrency with the cash back they earn, and says there will be no association transaction fees. As PayPal-owned Venmo is expanding its support for cryptocurrency with today's launch of new feature that will allow users to buy cryptocurrencies and very seamlessly with no transaction fees. Interesting. The next one is a company called Helium, a P2P, meaning peer-to-peer 5G wireless network setup, that's kind of interesting because normally when you get 5G, you're getting it not from another user, you're getting it from a tower or an antenna, for lack of a better word, and a peer-to-peer 5G wireless network startup, Helium, raises $111 million, led by Andreessen Horowitz, in a token sale. That's itself kind of interesting. Says it has 116,000 wireless hotspots in 11,000 cities, with 500,000 more backordered. Napster's Sean Fanning co-founded Helium. Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, some of the earlier investors were Khosla Ventures, Google Ventures, along with some of the better known names. Market cap of Helium is at around 1.7 billion US dollars. Peer-to-peer web services platform, essentially.
This is we'll be hearing more about Helium, no doubt. Really interesting. Andreessen Horowitz tweets out that we're excited to partner with Helium, powering a community-owned and operated wireless network, aka the People's Network, which is not easy to shut down for a government to shut down. Really interesting.
And there's the
Imagine
FT.
getting
I'm sorry, Tyler. And there's the FTC point, like with Sean Parker and everything. If you're talking about consolidating markets and areas, but
well, it's also kind of Sean is kind of a hardcore libertarianish ethos, empowering people and not companies, and that's where this kind of plays in. It's quite interesting. So the next headline is Notion Life Lock says it will merge with Avast. Who cares? Xiaomi announces the Mix 4 smartphone with a bezel-less design, which means the screen goes absolutely to the very edge of the phone, which Apple is still a ways away from doing, and an under-display selfie camera, meaning there's not only is there no notch at the top of the phone, there's not even a pinhole for the camera. The camera's hiding under the screen, and launching for $770. And I imagine it will have better specs than every spec on the iPhone 12s or iPhone 13 for $770 versus $1,200 ish, $1,300 for the iPhone. So Xiaomi is already announcing with their new iPhone bezel-less screen all the way to the edges, notchless, pinholeless new phone for $770. The next big headline is something called Doximetry, a networking service for doctors, did their quarterly report, and it's a med tech startup that's booming, as they all are during COVID. Zomato does their quarter report, which is out of India, and they're up 300% year over year, of course, during COVID and people locked in their houses. A Seoul-based company called Deep Brain AI, maker of customer-facing AI-powered virtual avatars, raises $44 million, led by Korean Development Bank. NVIDIA says Omniverse which it calls the Metaverse for Engineers, now has 50,000 plus customers, and it will be opened up to millions of users of 3D modeling app Blender. And if who's the regular listener from NVIDIA who's always in the audience? I wonder if she might be able to jump on stage.
Mengdi.
Yeah, Mengdi. Is Mengdi in the room? Now, she normally joins our other time zone where we meet twice a day. You can see our schedule by clicking on the title of the room. But Mengdi works at NVIDIA and can help
She
us
was on stage
earlier. Yeah.
just 15 minutes
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Unfortunate. So anyways, yeah, NVIDIA is a huge player into things with 3D modeling because their processors are optimized for enabling 3D modeling. And that's when we get into VR and AR, that's a whole lot of 3D modeling. When you step into that virtual space, it's essentially a 3D modeled space, and which is optimized on their chips. That's why they're a big player in that space and one to watch closely. Other interesting headlines at the moment is a health tech company raised a whole bunch, 220 million from Katu, which you can, when you hear that name, you can think of Facebook's money. Rife Health, they're called. And Nanox, which digitizes x-rays, has agreed to acquire Zebra Medical Vision, which makes AI-based tools for radiologists, in a deal valued at 200 million. Pave, whose software analyzes HR data to help companies close pay and equity gaps, raises 46 million. And Unity, which is also a huge player in the future of VR and AR. They're one of the biggest players in video games today, helping video game developers make video game environments. It's a huge platform that will, is also posed, set up very nicely to for VR and AR environment creators. So Unity does their Q2 revenue report up 48% year over year and says it will acquire a remote desktop streaming company called Parsec for 320 million. And other interest, Jerry, a car ownership super app and insurance comparison service with 1 million US users, raises 75 million at a 450 million valuation. And Robinhood buys Say Technologies, which raised 8 million, and whose service helps stock shareholders exercise their voting rights. Oh, that's interesting. If we see Robinhood bring voting rights into Robinhood, that could be very interesting. And Jerry, that car ownership super app with insurance and shared ownership and stuff, that's where it's all going. And what else did we have? TCL, which is long been the flag bearer of Roku TVs, launches TVs with Google TV, saying it wants to give consumers more choice and isn't abandoning Roku. Twitter suspends Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene for 7 days over vaccine misinformation, saying it's her fourth strike and another offense could lead to a permanent ban of a U.S. representative who's using Twitter to share misinformation about vaccines. So Twitter's now removed her for the fourth and final time. Last warning. And Gusto offers payroll and HR support for SMBs, raises 175 million. And that's pretty much the Google announces a pay calculator for their staff who want to work remotely to calculate how much of a pay cut they'll have to take if they don't work at the company office and they want to live remotely, so that they can figure. And I wonder, the algorithm behind that pay calculator, obviously it factors in how much it would cost to replace that person if they're working fully remotely. Because people working fully remotely year round are now competing with people from India and Romania and Ukraine and Albania, and where they're willing to work for, I don't know, a tenth of the price of a traditional Google engineer. So if you want to work fully remotely, of course you can, but you'll be competing with the global workforce who work for a single digit % of your current salary in Silicon Valley, by the way. So up to you. You're free to work remotely if you wish. You're just going to compete with everyone else who's willing to work fully remotely. So that's pretty much Reuters reporting U.S. prisons are exploring the use of AI to analyze inmates' phone calls, a practice privacy advocates say could amplify racial bias in the justice system. But more importantly, the idea that you could do real-time transcriptions of every prison phone call and all kinds of interesting analysis that you could do. As we know, data is very powerful, and it's interesting to see governments now. This is an example. This is really interesting. China understands the power of data and tech and how they use it in terms of a control apparatus for their own citizens. And this is a case of the US employing this in the first place where they could employ it, which is the prisons, because the prisoners don't have all the same rights that people outside of prison have or enjoy. So this is really interesting. The US using AI and data on US prisoners. Watch out. That's a potential slippery slope waiting to happen. So those are the boring headlines that your cousins and coworkers are sharing. So watch out.
Tyler, can I just comment on this last point
Yeah, go
very,
ahead,
very
Lakeisha.
quickly?
Yeah.
It's really interesting because from a researcher standpoint within the US, we have to, Thailand is completely different, but in the US, to conduct research on human beings, we have to go through this rigorous human subjects, institution review board process at all U.S. institutions because of experimentation that has been done on vulnerable populations, whether it was the Tuskegee experiment. So at every university and or research institution, you have to say that if I'm going to, research my product or my theory on people who are considered vulnerable, which prisoners are protected within that class, there's an entirely different set of protocols that needs to be used. So it's just really interesting that these tech companies and or the government have found a way to work around that.
Yep. Okay. So somebody, Craig, in the audience, I think Craig jumped on stage. Craig, you found a really interesting link we can share, and I am now sharing, about a crypto company that is now repositioning itself as a DAO, a decentralized organization, essentially. And in the tweet I just twatted on Twitter at TNATW, you can see a graphic of how they are restructuring themselves, as many cryptocurrency or crypto companies are likely to be considering and even planning on doing if this infrastructure bill passes. Yes?
Yeah, that's right. Shapeshift is a pretty interesting startup out of Colorado. They were attempting to be, I guess, a little bit more of a traditional organization and brokerage, crypto brokerage. And the founder of that is a pretty interesting chap who started off with a gambling app related to Bitcoin. Had a lot of success and sold that. And now it's turning into this DAO, distributed autonomous organization. So it's completely decentralizing itself, including the company. And it will be run through governance tokens, the Fox tokens. And by doing this, they become a DEX instead of a brokerage, and avoid
decentralized
that,
exchange.
Yeah, decentralized exchange, and avoid that regulation.
Right. And by the way, so exchanges are normally where the governments can control the on-ramps and off-ramps to these exchanges. It's a marketplace, basically, where people buy and sell anything, right? But it's an exchange of crypto assets. And if you want to be an exchange in the US, you have to be highly, highly, highly regulated, because they want to know everyone going in and out of your marketplace. And that's how they get you. But if you're a decentralized exchange, meaning you're kind of floating in the cloud and there's no way for the government to build an on-ramp or an off-ramp to your exchange, and it's not easy to architect, engineer a truly decentralized exchange that is uncustodial, meaning it runs autonomously. There's no central point where they could cut the cable and shut you down. And an example of that kind of is Pirate Bay, which is not really an exchange, although it's a free exchange, people putting up and taking down things for free, basically. So Pirate Bay does run against the wishes of anyone trying to shut it down. And there's very few instances of things that have managed to architect and engineer themselves to be impervious to the threats of the U.S. government's attempts to shut it down. But if you do properly build a DEX, you can't shut it down, and nor can you punish anyone who's running it. Well, in the case of Pirate Bay, they did find out who built it. It was the founders were well known. They were incarcerated. They did jail time, but then they finished their jail times, and now they're back out. And that's kind of the problem also with this company, where if they say, we're a DEX, and the government says, but still you have to follow our laws. We know who you are as founders, hand over the keys. And you're going to say, nope, I swallowed the keys, they're gone. And they're going to say, well, then you're going to have to sit in this jail cell until you poop out those keys. And that's why Satoshi's anonymous, by the way, because he understood this, but that this day would come. And that's going to be the difficult problem for the people who convert from, being based in the U.S. to wanting to be DEXs. If they're not anonymous or pseudonymous, their identities are known, they're going to have to pay. They're going to be forced. They're going to be incarcerated and forced to hand over the keys. And if they don't hand over the keys, they'll do jail time until they hand over the keys. It's a sticky situation. You have to start the company pseudonymously, as Satoshi did, if you don't want to risk being incarcerated, essentially. So I think you're going to start seeing companies will shut down. Magically, new companies will start up with anonymous figures or pseudonymous figures in the background who are running the show. And so we'll see how it all shakes out. Or they can do the DAO, be known individuals as founders of those companies, and go to countries that have no extradition treaties with the U.S., like Moldova, and then hang out in Moldova, build their company. And then America's going to tell Moldova, hey, we want that individual. Moldova's going to say, we don't have an extradition treaty with you. You don't send us our criminals when we ask for them. Hence, we don't send you people you're asking for. Chad and South Sudan and Russia do the same. And that's why Edward Snowden's in Russia, by the way, because America would love to have Edward Snowden brought to America, but Russia doesn't have an extradition treaty. So Edward Snowden lives in Russia. By the way, had Julian Assange made it to one of those countries, he would be living more or less as a free person as well, like Edward Snowden. Unfortunately, he found himself in a territory that has an extradition treaty with the U.S., and it's looking like he might have to be, sent back to the U.S. So,
Tyler, even though a lot of countries have extradition treaties, those extradition treaties have a lot of loopholes in them
sure,
that can be played
which
legally.
is why Julian Assange is in such a court case at the moment to figure out if he'll be extradited to the U.S.
The only other thing I'd add is that I think Bitcoin is maybe the best example of a successful DAO.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, it would have been, if it had not been built that way, it probably would have been shut down long before now. So, yeah, the fact that it's successful is probably due to the fact that it was brilliantly architected to withstand what Satoshi understood would be the pressures and powers that be, which he has thus far done. So
I have a question. Recently, I always see a Satoshi Nakamoto bot on Twitter, and every time there is a segment from that account, Jack Dorsey will like it. Who is behind this bot?
Is that how would you honestly expect somebody to know the answer to your question?
No, because it's a Jack Dorsey endorsed Twitter account, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not.
It could be any. Sure, it could be anyone.
I think
in
you're
the
behind the
community.
account, Cheryl, and you're just trying to promote it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay. Now, the interesting articles of the moment. Katarina found this one of what they call Uber Eats of electronic car charging, called Roadie. Hungry EVs will appreciate this on-demand mobile charging service. So when your EV runs out of power, like your car used to run out of gas and somebody would have to bring you gas. Now somebody can bring you this big stack of batteries and plug it into your car and charge up your car enough to get to the next charging station. And it's called Roadie. And so it's the Uber Eats of electronic car charging. So your battery dies, you open the app, you call over somebody to bring you a battery pack to plug into your car. There it is. You can see a photo of it from the tweet I just twatted on Twitter at TNATW. Dan, you've got a green tech article? Okay. The next one is from Katerina. New insights into how the first brain works in the gut. New research explains how the nervous system in the gut, known as the ENS, the enteric nervous system, causes propulsion along the gut. And you can read all about that at the Tech News Twitter account. The next one is also a study about the physical exercise improves health of the brain and other organs. New research provides evidence of a functional link between epigenetic rewiring of enhancers to control the body. Just tweeted that one out as well. We're tweeting all these out rapid fire, machine gun style, to the Twitter account at TNATW. This one from David Crace via New York Times. The headline reads, "Do chance meetings at the office boost innovation?" There's no evidence of it, is the headline from the New York Times, which counters a very famously quoted Harvard study about the clustering effects of humans in innovation, which has been the kind of evidence proposed. And whenever people debate, should we be working in offices together and clustering, and does that lead to more innovation? And this is a huge topic at the moment around, should we return to offices? Are we more innovative in a hive, when we meet serendipitously? And that was one of the key words in that Harvard study, which is it enhances serendipity. And does that lead to more productivity and innovation? And this New York Times article says that there's no evidence of an increase in innovation by putting humans in close proximity, like AKA an office. So for some, the office even stifles creativity. Well, that's a great point, by the way. As the pandemic eases in the US, a few companies seek to reimagine what work might look like. So you might want to read that one I just tweeted out from David at the Tech News Twitter account if you find yourself in that argument with your boss about the value of innovation by coming back to the office. The next one is from the Texas Tribune, which says dozens of Texas hospitals are out of ICU beds as COVID-19 cases again overwhelm the state's capacity. Oh, wow. Who could have predicted such a thing? This surge is by far the largest and most aggressive that we've seen, said the health authority of the Austin and Travis County, which urged eligible Texans to go get vaccinated, as I did months before when there was still plenty of time to do so here, where we got Delta first here after India went through Myanmar into Thailand, and we suffered from it. And I warned everybody about 6 weeks ago, and apparently the word didn't get through to the fine people of Texas, who now find themselves without ICU beds. And that's very unfortunate indeed. And the next one is from Axios, from our friend Evan. The headline reads, "Big Telecom comes out on top in this big, broad new infrastructure bill," because a lot of that money in that $65 billion is earmarked for broadband upgrades, which means the telecoms. So Big Telecom is a huge benefactor of the broadband upgrade in the infrastructure bill. And that's you can read all about that in the tweet I just twatted. And thank you, Evan, for that one. And this next one is about a former NASA rocket scientist designs a drone, and it looks totally different than conventional drones. And you can see a photo of it in this article I'm tweeting out from Drone Life. And I'm trying to gather what else might be the unique differentiators of this new drone. It says this fledgling drone manufacturing company led by former NASA engineer recently announced the launch of its first commercial product, a multi-rotor unmanned aircraft whose gasoline-electric hybrid engine allows it to stay aloft for 8 times longer than conventional multi-rotor drones. So that's what they're going for, is 8 times longer airtime. And then this one,
Tyler,
yes.
Monday is back on stage if you want to ask her again.
Oh,
NVIDIA.
hey, Mengde. Mengdi, there was the article about, is one of the top articles today, about the NVIDIA Omniverse, which they're calling the metaverse for engineers. And what else was it? How it's going to soon open up to millions of people doing 3D rendering and whatnot. I wondered if you had any comments about it.
Hi, I just heard my name. So you're asking for the comments on the metaverse,
Yeah,
looking
on
for
what they
NVIDIA?
call the NVIDIA calls Omniverse.
Yes.
I guess that's internally an important initiative.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, they're very different business unit. Like, so yeah, I
Okay.
don't work directly with them, but like I kind of collaborate with some of them.
Oh,
So
I
yeah.
see.
So do you have any specific questions
No,
about
no,
it?
no. We
Yeah.
don't have any specific questions. We're just curious about
Oh.
it. It's not yet kind of. It says the headline reads: NVIDIA says Omniverse, which it calls the metaverse for engineers, now has 50,000 users and will be opened up to millions of users with 3D modeling app Blender. And
Hmm.
yeah, so we're looking forward to that. Just curious if you had any.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, it's also be used in so many different areas like architecture and game design and
Yeah.
just entertainment. So yeah,
So it seems
yeah.
like it's a potentially I guess Unity also is playing in that space, and maybe it's. I wonder who else is in that space to compete for the build the kind of architectural framework to build the future of games, and as you say, architecture and probably the metaverse.
Epic Games are very heavy into
Mhm.
architecture.
Yes,
Epic as well.
yeah, Epic
Yeah, so
Games.
I guess this Omniverse and Unity is like different stages of the development.
Okay,
So I guess Omniverse is like an earlier stage, and after you develop it, and you can kind of like export it to Unity engine. So
yes,
yeah, I guess it's different stages.
yeah.
Hmm.
But I think Ben's exactly right. Epic is going huge into that space as well, and it seems like
Hmm.
those
Yeah,
are.
architectural visualization has been a big part of their bit of Epic Games Unreal Engine for a long time. So
Yeah.
yeah, they definitely got the finger on the pulse there.
Yep. Okay. So the next interesting headline that I got here is I just tweeted out. It says artificial intelligence unlocks extreme weather mysteries. From lake draining drought in California to bridge breaking floods in China, extreme weather is wreaking havoc. And preparing for weather extremes is a challenging climate. In a challenging climate remains a challenge. In a changing climate remains a challenge. However, because of their causes are complex and their response to global warming is often not well understood, now Stanford researchers have developed a machine learning tool to identify conditions for extreme precipitation events in the Midwest, which account for over half of all major U.S. flood disasters. Published in Geophysical Research Letters, their approach is one of the first examples using AI to analyze causes of long-term changes in extreme events and could help make projections of such events more accurate. Here's the quote. We know that flooding has been getting worse, says study lead author Frances Davenport, a PhD student in Earth System Science in Stanford School of Earth, Energy, and Environmental Sciences. Our goal was to understand why extreme precipitation is increasing, which in turn could lead to better predictions about future flooding, which boy, oh boy, would many Germans would have appreciated this technology, about 2 weeks ago. Among other, and by the way, China as well, and North Korea just had massive. They're having whole towns becoming flooded and losing their homes. Among other impacts, global warming is expected to drive heavier rain and snowfall by creating a warmer atmosphere that can hold more moisture. Scientists hypothesize this climate change may affect precipitation in other ways too, such as changing when and where storms occur. Revealing these impacts have remained difficult, however, in part because global climate models do not necessarily have the spatial resolution to model these regional extreme events. Another quote, this new approach to leveraging machine learning techniques is opening new avenues in our understanding of the underlying causes of changing extremes that could enable communities and decision makers to better prepare for high impact events such as those that are so extreme they will fall outside of our historical experience. Well, that's a very nice scientific way to say, yeah, you're fucked. And now we've got an early detection system to tell you to evacuate your home as if it were like a fire or a hurricane or an earthquake. And these massive rain events will destroy your homes. And hopefully they can give you now a few extra minutes to get out and leave before this extreme rain causes a flood that's going to wash your house down the river. Good, we need it because this is going to become a very common occurrence in the very near future. these flash floods due to extreme rains, as they scientifically state, the likes of which fall outside our historical experience. Yes, indeed, unprecedented ahistorical experiences of incredible rainfalls. Very, very comically put. So now we got a little prediction thanks to Stanford. Let's hope we get an app notification when your house is about to wash down the river and give you time to run. So the uh, 1/3 of finance firms accelerate the use of AI to detect money laundering, is the headline. Financial services firms are stepping up their use of AIs and machine learning technology to fight increasing money laundering activity, according to Computer Weekly. Just tweeted that out. Mercedes-Benz launches the EQS electric sedan for just $100,000 and has launched orders and its configurator for the EQS electric sedan in Europe. The German automaker's new flagship electric vehicle starts taking orders now. And quite beautiful. And it's yeah, Dan?
Just while you're kind of on these general climate subjects, we're going to have a tech news climate room. At, I guess after the next session at it's 9:30 a.m. California time, whatever time that is everywhere else. But at the end of the next session,
Yeah.
we'll have a climate room on Wednesday morning.
We've got another 20 minutes here, and then we meet again in about 5 hours after that for a couple hours, and then there's the climate, because every Wednesday, as we do, we have the climate newsroom, which Dan brilliantly moderates. So we'll be joining for that. That's about 10 hours or 11 hours from now or so. So if you can join us, please do, where we'll go on into all these headlines in more depth. San Francisco's coronavirus case rate is suddenly higher than the US's, which is unique because San Francisco used to be under the US rate. But San Francisco Chronicle is asking why San Francisco's COVID case rate is suddenly higher than the US's. Some restrictive measures have returned to help reduce transmissions. You can read all about that. And then Marcus Landstrom, also from Sweden in the audience, sent in this one about the Scaniverse is joining Niantic. And this is really interesting to people who follow the 3D space closely, because Niantic is the makers of Pokemon Go, which is an AR app where you run around a forest like a jackass looking for, objects, virtual objects. But it's fantastic because it's popularizing, the metaverse and augmented reality through your phone, looking for virtual goods through your phone camera lens. And they now have their own glasses, so you can put your phone in your pocket and use the glasses to see these virtual objects that you're running around and getting hit by cars, as you run through intersections in pursuit of a Pokemon. And not only do they have the glasses, they're also adding other interesting elements, and they're really shaping up to be a huge player to compete with Facebook and Google in this future of AR and VR. So they've now acquired another company called Scaniverse, and Scaniverse will continue as a standalone app, and together with Niantic, we'll be able to take 3D scanning to new heights. We could not be more excited to join such a great team. And Scaniverse, if we look a little closer as to what they're all about, I believe it's a repository. Indeed, it is. It's an app on your phone that allows you to scan any 3D object in real life. You can scan anything on your desk or a statue at a museum or anything, your car, and you can make a 3D scan of your car with your phone so that your car can exist in the 3D universe as an object. And you scan it with the LiDAR camera on your current iPhone, which of course will get upgraded in the next iPhone coming out next month. And people are 3D scanning everything all the time. Millions of objects a week are being added to this endless repository of 3D objects, which will become very useful once we all start wearing augmented reality glasses. We'll ask for, I don't know, I want to see an alligator in 3D. Boom. Of course, there's an alligator that's been scanned in 3D. In fact, anything you can imagine has already been scanned in 3D, and anything that you can't imagine will very soon be scanned in 3D and made in 3D. Literally anything you can imagine. There will be repositories of billions of objects 3D scanned to easily import into whatever you want to imagine into your 3D virtual augmented reality. And so that now you understand why Pokemon Go is acquiring the app that enables and the scanning of and the repository of millions of 3D scannable objects. They want to be
There
able.
is
And
there is some more work to do though. So if you
Sure.
just scan, firstly, phones are crap at scanning small objects at the moment. An
Yeah.
iPhone doesn't get any detail on a small object, but that'll get massively better really quickly. The other thing is if you just scan the object, you've just got a static mesh that doesn't, it's just a hollow kind of dead thing. If you want to use that in a game, it's not to underestimate the amount of work. And I think AI could do a lot of this work in the future. But the amount of work to turn that mesh into, say, like a living, breathing alligator that can move and has a spinal structure and has simulated muscles, that's a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
So if you want something that's just completely still, like a statue, could be cool. It'd be really exciting when you start adding to that some sort of behavioral scanning. You know, maybe
Yeah.
take a video of it, and then it implies like the skeleton and that sort of stuff. Because what you need is a rigged model
Yes.
as well as just a mesh and a texture.
I just tweeted
Yeah.
out a 3D scan of a car captured with Scaniverse, and you can spin it around in 3D. It's a mini, and you can see the car. You can see how well it captures the car with the app, which it looks like a car, in 3D.
Yeah, and car-sized objects are perfect for the current iPhones scanners.
Yeah.
And as they get higher resolution, then you go down to much smaller objects. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
I'd love to take a video of like well, not an alligator ideally, but maybe a slightly more benign animal, and then have a stack of software turn that into a full model. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, the idea that you could I'm no doubt there will soon be AIs that will allow you to kind of add animation to the static 3D objects like animals, so that they could behave in an alligator-like way. You'll likely tell GPT-4 through an API, "Hey, make my alligator 3D scan behave like an alligator." So that's not far off either. So it's going to be wild to.
what
Yeah.
what I'm most excited about is when these 3D objects get down to, the dimensional accuracy that you need to actually create the parts in the
Oh, for 3D
real
printing. Yeah.
reality in RR.
Yeah. That's a
So
wild point, because I just tweeted out an antique chair that you can see through Scaniverse, and it looks very, very accurate. It's not accurate enough to 3D printed. Almost. You can see from the tweet I just twatted, but the
yeah.
point that you make is really interesting. Is of course the accuracy will continue to get better until it captures it close enough to 3D print it, so that you will then be able to 3D print really. There will be no shortage. You won't be limited by.
It's my co-founder
Yeah,
slapped me whenever I talk to investors about it, but this is about space.
yeah,
You need to be able to make stuff in real time in space and just go up with a catalog instead of carrying that heavy stuff that you got to pay millions of dollars for.
yep. So okay, here's a better looking car. Actually, I just found with color. Okay, so the next, I just tweeted out examples of 3D scans, and people are 3D scanning freaking everything. It's kind of wild. Here's another one of a teddy bear. You get an idea. Okay, so the next interesting articles from the New York Times from Dr. Fran. The headline reads, "This is really scary. Kids struggle with long COVID. Lingering physical, mental, and neurological symptoms are affecting children as well as adults, including many who had mild reactions to the initial coronavirus." Next up, brain connectivity can build better AI. Artificial neural networks modeled on human brain connectivity can effectively perform complex cognitive tasks. And this is from Neuroscience News. So I just tweeted that out, if that sounds like your cup of tea. And then this one I love, from Todd McLeese. We all are familiar with the Boston Dynamics Spot, their robotic dog, which the New York Police Department had a very short run with, and then sent it back. And the Boston Dynamics dog Spot costs $75,000. So it might not be on your Christmas wish list. However, Xiaomi, my favorite hardware manufacturer, who has a reputation for making really well-made hardware, well-designed hardware at prices that boggle the mind, have just made a sort of clone for $1,500. And that is on my Christmas wish list. I want this robotic dog, which has cameras and facial recognition, so it can recognize its master and follow it around and do all. It can do. And they're reporting it can do backflips. So the other question is, what other amazing use cases might it have? If it has a camera and a microphone, it essentially can eventually be upgraded to with all the latest algorithms of machine object recognition, and it can become incredibly smart indeed. It's kind of like having Siri walk around with you, or Alexa, or
I'm
Google Assistant.
curious the reaction of your real dog.
Me too. I'm trying to imagine how my dog's going to interact with
Do you think you'll be enemy or playmate?
Yeah, I'd like to see this dog fight a actual pit bull. Something tells me the pit bull will win. So the next article is from Evan: Why high-profile smart cities fail. And it's talking about Sidewalks Labs' failed effort in Toronto, and also Amazon's HQ2 in Queens, which got pulled on that preemptively. It didn't get enough political muscle to. Amazon wanted to build their second headquarters in Queens, and that got shot down before it ever got off the ground. And this article goes into details about Google's and Amazon's failed attempts to build smart cities in Toronto and Queens, respectively. The next one is from Reuters. The headline reads: U.S. warned Brazil about China's Huawei 5G network, according to White House officials. U.S. warned Brazil that Huawei could leave it high and dry on 5G, is the headline from Reuters. The sub-headline says, Washington, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan raised concerns about Huawei equipment in Brazil's 5G telecom network during his visit to the country last week, a White House official said on Monday, but Brazil made no promises about whether it would use products from Huawei. Okay, next up is the high cost of ignoring the nexus between climate change and migration. Oh boy, this is from the Boston Globe. Thank you to Nolormi for this one. The Biden administration must act to protect migrants created by climate change. And now we're getting into it. There we go. We're starting to realize what climate change, the real actual problem of climate change, it's not that it's fucking hot in your backyard. No. The problem is, and it's not the problem that you're going to have power outages because you've run out of water and you have to, go to a car wash to take a shower. That's not the problem. No. That's just a given. You're going to run out of water. You're going to run out of power. It's going to be too hot. Your air conditioners won't work, but that's not the real problem. No. The real problem is you're going to have tens of millions of people that are going to migrate due to the fact that they're where they were previously living is uninhabitable. And what happens in a world where you have tens of millions of climate refugees? That's the problem. That causes political instability on a mass scale very, very quickly. So, as we now have reportedly more than 10 million people, I believe it's 15 million refugees leaving Afghanistan today. As we talk in this room at this very moment, there are video news crews from all over Europe in Afghanistan following 10 to 15 million people leaving Afghanistan as Taliban is starting to take over some of the cities in Afghanistan. Many of the people in Afghanistan don't want to hang around to find out what happens next because they remember what happens the last time the Taliban took over Afghanistan 15, 20 years ago. So they're leaving, and they only have two options. You could climb the Himalayas and go into, China. That doesn't seem like an appealing option for these people. Strangely, they're not heading that direction. They're heading next door into Pakistan, who is feverishly trying to build a barbed wire fence now between Pakistan and Afghanistan to stop 15 million. They already have 15 million Afghanistan refugees in Pakistan. They don't want to have 15 million more. So they're building a barbed wire fence as fast as they possibly can as we speak. So they are going westward to Iran, which is, of course, obviously not their favorite place to go. And they're passing through Iran to Turkey. And Turkey also doesn't necessarily want 15 million more Afghani refugees. And they're also trying to build their defenses. And the question is, and by the way, it's not only the Taliban as to why they're leaving. If you ask the people why they're leaving, they will tell you it's because of drought, that they've run out of water. And the news crews are asking these people, why are you leaving? And many of them are not saying Taliban. They're saying it's the drought. There's no water. I'd have no water I have no future here because it's a lot of agricultural economy. And there's no agriculture or economy without water. So they're leaving. And by the way, Iran, they're not staying in Iran because Iran itself is having mass protests because of drought. So they're not staying in Iran. So where are they going? You're now starting to see, as I've been telling you now for many months, the beginnings of mass climate refugeeism due to climate change, climate refugees and droughts, tens of millions. By the way, will continue unabated for the next 100 years, and the water is not coming back. And this water stress has been predicted. That's why I can say it so confidently. And that's why I moved 6 years ago. It's now pouring rain outside of my window. If I move the mic outside of the window, you will hear massive rainfall. And there was a headline yesterday from Cheryl from Nikkei Asia that my part of the world is going to see unprecedented more rainfall. That's not a coincidence because I've been studying this for nearly a decade. So,
this already happened in Syria. The Syrian crisis
correct.
was caused by a drought that lasted 5 years or something. Then,
and
that was a climate change.
When I
crisis
tell you to
then.
Google the words water stress, I'm not joking. Just do yourself a favor. Just type in the words water stress map into Google so you can find out what parts of the world are going to become uninhabitable based on the climate science. And it turns out it's the entire Middle East of 55 million Muslims are in the very near future going to have to relocate. And the question is,
and it's also all of southern Europe as well as northern Africa. That around the Mediterranean is like one of the worst hit spots at the upcoming this century. Take a look. It was published in the IPCC report.
So I've been ranting about this for a few months now, and it's starting. So pay attention, and it's going to impact you personally in the very near future, politically, because the headline says Biden administration must act to protect migrants created by climate change. And so America is going to become a political powder keg over mass migration of climate refugees. Are we going to, there's going to be tens of millions of climate refugees, and Europe just passed a burqa ban as a clever preemptive move to prevent them from coming into Europe. So do you think they're going into China? Do we need to mention what's going on with Muslims in China? Do you think where do we imagine they're going? India? If anyone who understands anything about the Hindus and the Muslims of India, there's a reason Pakistan exists. It's because of the Muslims, in India. So trust me, they're not going into India. That's impossible. Just study Pakistan and India for 2 seconds to understand that dynamic. So it's not China, it's not India, it's not Europe. I guess it leaves Africa. We got 55 million Muslims going into Africa. So this is going to be an unprecedented change in our lifetimes. So the next headline, and that's a fantastic one. Thank you for sharing that one, Nilormi, is from Diwa from the Philippines, and it's via Mashable. It says, in a first, AI to replace judges for resolving real estate disputes in Dubai. Here it comes. We already know examples of this in China where AIs are used as judges in cases related to traffic infringements. And now Dubai is being reported by Mashable that there are AIs replacing judges and resolving real estate disputes in Dubai. And that trend will continue. The NSA awards secret $10 billion contract to Amazon. That was actually one of the biggest stories of today. Thank you, Todd, for that one. Elon Musk is slammed over SpaceX plan to put a satellite ad billboard in space. Plans announced earlier this week would see SpaceX team up with Geometric Energy Corporation on its CubeSat project and launch the ad billboard into space. And then we've got the how Sweden became the Silicon Valley of Europe, according to Reuters. And we spent the first hour of today talking about that. Thank you for that one, Cheryl. And China to ban karaoke songs with quote unquote illegal content, according to the BBC. China is set to ban karaoke songs that contain illegal content. Its Ministry of Culture has announced. Songs that fall under this category include those that endanger national unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, meaning any song that mentions Taiwan. So those who provide content to karaoke venues have been urged to review the songs and flag up to the ministry those that are potentially harmful. The rules are due to come out into effect October 1. Other songs that are set to be banned include those which incite ethnic hatred and ethnic discrimination, endanger national security, or harm national honor and interests, violate the state's religious policies, propagate obscenity, gambling, violence, and other criminal activities. China has more than 50,000 song and dance entertainment venues across the country. According to the ministry, it added that it was difficult for venue operators to identify illegal songs, given that some had music libraries of more than 100,000 songs, which was why they were encouraging content providers to take more responsibility. This is not the first time China has banned songs from karaoke venues. In 2018, some 6,000 songs were dropped because of copyright infringement. Censorship is common in China, with social media companies routinely removing content that is perceived to be threatening to the social stability of the ruling Communist Party, according to the BBC. So just tweeting that one out. And then we covered the Shapeshift organization. And that brings us to the top of the hour. Well done, everybody. We will meet again in 5 hours. So go enjoy yourself a foot-long Subway tuna sandwich. And we will see you again in 5 hours or tomorrow, whichever is more convenient to you. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Working hard for that
See you
Subway
later.
endorsement.
Go get that
Take care,
Subway.
everyone.
Thank you.